The whispering wood did not whisper with birdsong anymore. It whispered with the small sounds men made when they tried not to die. Steel rasping from sheaths, the wet cough of a wounded rider, the harsh breathing of horses that had run too far and too hard through mud and roots. Rain threaded through the branches like cold fingers, turning the world into a dim, gray corridor where every trunk looked like an enemy's shadow. Robb Stark sat his horse with a stillness that did not belong to a boy. It was not pride that held him upright, nor the bright heat of triumph. It was the weight of a thing that had happened and could not be taken back. Jaime Lannister, Ser Jaime the Kingslayer, the gilded sword of House Lannister, was on his knees in the muck, wrists bound, golden hair plastered to his brow, his breathing sharp with fury and disbelief. Men stared at him as if he were a myth hauled down from some song and forced to bleed like anyone else. Gray wind prowled the edge of torchlight. The direwolf's fur looked black where it was soaked, his eyes pale as frozen water. He moved without haste, nose low, drawing the battle's truth into himself. Blood, fear, iron, the sour stench of men who had been too brave and too slow. When gray wind paused, the men around him paused too, as if even their hearts had learned to watch for his judgment. The great John Umber laughed. Once, then spat as if laughter tasted wrong in a place like this. "A Lannister in chains," he said, voice booming through wet leaves. "And not some pup's bastard neither. The bloody lion's own tooth." "Keep your voice down," said Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, as calmly as if he were speaking in Riverrun's hall. He was mounted, cloak dripping, his eyes scanning the trees beyond torchlight where darkness could still hide men. "Woods like these carry sound." "We have the wood," Great John rumbled, but he lowered his voice anyway, the way a man lowers his head before a storm he cannot wrestle. Robb looked at Jaime Lannister and tried to find the right feeling. He had imagined this moment too many times on too many roads. He had imagined his father's face, his father's voice, the sound of the word traitor thrown like a stone in the great September of Baelor. He had imagined the sword falling. He had imagined King's Landing cheering. But Jaime's eyes were green and bright with hate and pain, and he looked more like a man than a monster. That was what made the victory dangerous. Monsters were easy. Men were complicated. "Get him up," Robb said. Jaime's head snapped up. "You think you can order me like one of your kennel boys?" Greatjon's hand twitched toward his axe. Rickard Karstark's mouth tightened, the lines around it carved by grief and fury. His sons had died beneath Lannister blades, under Jaime's command, and the memory sat on him like a chain of its own. Robb did not answer Jaime. He did not need to. He turned his horse instead and rode through his own men, hearing the crackle of torches, the squelch of boots, the murmurs that rose and fell like wind. Victory should have felt warm. It did not. Victory felt like standing on thin ice while the water moved beneath. At the edge of the clearing, where his scouts and outriders clustered under dripping boughs, a man pushed forward. He was young, face smeared with mud, eyes wide with the urgency of someone carrying a message that could kill kings. "My lord," the scout panted, bowing so fast he nearly slid. "We rode hard along the river road south and east. There's riders, not ours. Many, Lannister colors, moving fast. Too fast for foraging. Too fast for comfort." "How many?" Robb asked. The scout swallowed. "Hard to say in this weather. Hundreds, at least. More behind. And..." He hesitated as if the word itself could strike him. "And there's talk among the small folk. A lord's party. A lion cloak." Silence tightened the air. The rain seemed to listen. "Tywin," the Blackfish said softly, not a question. Robb felt the name like a weight placed on his shoulders. Tywin Lannister was not a man you expected to find in the mud of a forest. Tywin Lannister was the kind of man who sat behind stone walls and moved armies like pieces on a board. "He's coming for Jaime," Rickard Karstark said, each word clipped cleanly. "Or to crush us while we're blooded. Or both," said Roose Bolton from the shadows of a tree, voice mild as milk. His pale eyes watched Robb the way a man watches a river in flood. Measuring, waiting. Robb's mind snapped through possibilities. If Tywin was close, if Tywin moved fast, then Tywin had either left a larger host behind or he was not bringing one at all. A lion cloak, a lord's party. This was a head with teeth, not a whole beast. Tywin riding hard meant desperation or opportunity. Either could kill him. Grey Wind's ears lifted. He gave a low sound in his throat, not a growl, not a whine. Something older, something that belonged to the deep of forests where men were visitors. Robb met the Blackfish's gaze. In Brynden Tully's eyes he saw no fear, only calculation and the hard readiness of a man who had been waiting his whole life for one perfect mistake from an enemy who rarely made them. "Show me where," Robb said. The scout pointed with a shaking hand. "Along the old river track, my lord. There's a bend, stones and roots. A place where the wagons always bog in spring." Robb's mouth tasted of iron. He looked back toward the clearing where Jaime Lannister knelt, where men were already talking as if the war had ended because one lion had been caught. The war was not ending. It was changing. "Get the host moving," Robb ordered, voice steady. "Quietly. No horns. No songs. We leave the dead to the gods and the living to their legs. Great John, take the vanguard. Blackfish, come with me. Karstark, Bolton, bring your men. We're going hunting again." "And the Kingslayer?" Great John asked, eager as a hound. Robb glanced once toward Jaime. "He rides with us," Robb said. "And if Tywin wants his son back, he'll have to come into the trees to get him." Grey Wind slipped ahead into darkness as if the forest had opened its arms to him. Robb Stark followed, feeling the cold rain on his face like the first touch of winter, and somewhere in the black beyond, a lion was riding blind toward a trap he did not yet believe could exist. They moved like thieves through their own victory. Torches were doused and wrapped, horses led by the reins, iron muffled with cloth wherever it could be. Men who had been shouting an hour before now spoke in murmurs, as if the trees might carry their words to Lannister ears. Even the Greyjohn's laughter was gone, replaced by the heavy, eager silence of a man who knew another fight was coming and welcomed it like a feast. The river track was older than any king. It wound between black oaks and ash, hugging the land where the ground rose and fell in slow humps of stone. The rain made everything slick. Hooves slid, boots sank. A wagon well left behind from some forgotten merchant journey lay half swallowed in mud, a skeletal reminder that the Riverlands ate those who did not respect them. Brynden Tully pointed without speaking. Ahead, the track narrowed. On one side, a ridge climbed sharply, knuckled with boulders and thorn. On the other, the ground fell away toward a marshy hollow where reeds shivered and water pooled in brown sheets. In the middle, the road pinched between stone and root, a place where a handful of men could hold off 100, if the 100 could not spread. "A choke," the Blackfish murmured at last. "The kind your father would have liked." Robb's throat tightened at the mention, but he forced his mind to stay on the living. "How far behind is Tywin?" "Close," the scout said, breath still ragged. "They're pushing their mounts. I saw foam on the bit. They'll be here before dawn if they keep pace." "And if they slow?" Robb asked. "Then they're not desperate," Roose Bolton said pleasantly, "which would make them dangerous." Robb stared at the narrowing road until he could see it not as mud and stone but as a diagram. Men here, archers there, horses funneling into death. He had learned quickly in these months. He had to. War did not wait for boys to become men. "Karstark," Robb said, "take your spears and hold the marsh side. If they try to swing out, you pin them in the mud." Ricard Karstark nodded once, jaw rigid. "Gladly." "Roose," Robb said. "Archers on the ridge. I want arrows into their horses first. Not men. Horses. A man on foot in this mire is half caught already." Roose's pale eyes blinked, slow and thoughtful. "As you command, my lord." "Great John," Robb said, turning. "You'll be my hammer. You wait until I give the word. Then you come down the road like the god's own fury." Great John's grin returned, wolfish. "I. And you?" Robb said, looking at Jaime Lannister. Jaime's wrists were bound before him, chains clinking softly. 2 Stark men held him by the arms. He was mud to the knee and seething about it. "What of me?" Jaime sneered. "Will you put a bow in my hands and ask me to shoot my father?" The men holding him tightened their grip. Jaime twisted, but he was tired from fighting and worse, humiliated. Robb leaned in close enough that Jaime could smell him. Wet wool, horse, the faint copper tang that clung to anyone who had stood near blood. "You will stand where I put you," Robb said quietly, "and you will keep breathing." Jaime's smile was sharp. "So noble. Is that what they tell you? That you're noble because you keep a man alive?" Robb did not flinch. "I keep you alive because you're worth something. Your father taught you that." Something flickered in Jaime's eyes. Anger, yes, but also the quick, involuntary recognition of a truth he did not want to grant a northern boy. Robb straightened. His men moved into place with the sound of cloth and careful steps. The ridge swallowed Roose Bolton's archers until only pale faces and the curve of a bow could be seen through rain-streaked branches. Karstark's spearmen vanished into reeds, their helms bobbing like dull stones in a shallow stream. Great John Umber crouched with his chosen men behind a low rise, fingers clenched around axe hafts slick with damp. Robb stood at the narrowest point, the place where the road pinched. Gray wind appeared above on the ridge, a silent shadow against a lighter patch of sky. The dire wolf looked down at Robb, and Robb felt, irrationally, fiercely, that he was not alone in this. That whatever watched him from the old northern gods would in Winterfell watched him here too, through the eyes of a beast. Minutes stretched. Rain fell. The forest breathed. Then the first sound came, a distant clatter, then the unmistakable rhythm of hooves driven hard. Voices, muffled by wet air, grew closer. Metal chinked. A horn tried to call and died quickly, as if the man blowing it feared to announce himself. Robb's heart beat once, hard, and he thought of his father's last ride, his father's last honor. He thought of Sansa in a city of lions. He thought of Winterfell under snow, of Bran's broken legs and Rickon's small hands clutching a wolf pup. A banner edge appeared between trees, red and gold, heavy with rain, the lion blurred by water. Then horses, sleek and straining, nostrils flaring. Men in bright cloaks dulled by mud, eyes squinting into the gloom. They were not expecting a wall of Northmen in the road. For a breath, the Lannister vanguard slowed, confusion rippling through them. A man barked an order. Another voice, older, sharper, cut through the rest with a command that did not waste sound. Robb raised his hand. The first arrows hissed from the ridge like a swarm of dark insects. They struck horses with soft, sickening thuds. One mount screamed, high and horrible, and went down, dragging its rider with it into the mud. Another reared, eyes rolling white, and crashed sideways into the man behind it. The road, already narrow, became a snarl of panicked beasts. "Now," Robb whispered, and the whispering would answered. It happened so fast that the mind could not dress it in meaning until afterward. One moment there was order. Riders in a line, banners wet but proud, steel gleaming dully beneath clouded dawn. The next moment there was only motion, screaming, mud exploding under hooves, men clawing at reins that suddenly meant nothing because the beasts beneath them were dying. Robb's horse lunged forward at his heel. The Grachan's men poured out from behind the rise, axes raised, their war cries swallowed by rain but still terrifying in the shape of their mouths, in the wildness of their eyes. They did not ride like Southron knights with measured grace. They rode like men who had grown up with winter and wolves, like men who believed the world owed them nothing and they would take what they needed. The Lannister vanguard tried to form up. A sergeant bellowed for a line, for shields, for men to dismount and fight on foot. Some obeyed. Many could not. Their horses were down, legs kicking in the mud, making the road a killing ground of panicked flesh. Robb's blade met the first man who dared reach for him. The steel rang and then bit. The man fell back into the mire with a startled look, as if he had expected his armor to make him immortal. Gray wind came down like a silent nightmare. The dire wolf hit a horse's shoulder, jaws closing, and the beast went sideways with a strangled sound. Its rider, a knight in a red cloak, toppled and tried to roll away. Gray Wind's head snapped, and the knight stopped moving. Robb saw Tywin Lannister then, because Tywin Lannister did not behave like other men in battle. He did not flail or shout or panic. He sat his horse at the center of the column as if he were at a tourney, crimson cloak dragged by rain. His golden-streaked hair slicked back. His eyes were pale and cold, taking in the trap with the calm of a man counting coins. Around him, a ring of guards fought like men who knew their lives were bought and paid for. Robb recognized some sigils, Marbrand, Prester, a few Lannister household knights. They formed a tight knot, trying to push forward through the choke point, trying to break free into open ground where numbers and training could matter again. Robb drove his horse straight at that knot. "Robb!" The Blackfish shouted behind him, warning or pride. It was hard to tell. A Lannister guard swung a sword at Robb's head. Robb ducked, felt the wind of it, and shoved his blade up and under the man's arm where the plates did not meet. The guard made a sound like a broken bell and slid off his saddle. Another guard thrust a spear. Robb's horse shied. Mud sucked at its hooves. For a heartbeat, Robb thought he would go down. Thought he would be crushed beneath hooves and bodies the way so many boys died before they ever became men. Gray wind flashed between them, teeth snapping. The spearman screamed and dropped the shaft, clutching at a hand that was suddenly missing 2 fingers. Robb's horse found purchase. It surged forward again, and Robb was close enough now to see the lines at the corners of Tywin Lannister's eyes, to see the lack of fear there, the contempt. Tywin's gaze landed on Robb with a kind of measured curiosity, as if he were looking at a weapon he had underestimated. A man stepped in front of Tywin's horse, Ser Adam Marbrand. Robb realized with a jolt, the Lannister bannerman whose name he had heard at his father's table. Marbrand's sword was already red. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had killed many men and expected to kill many more. Robb's blade met Marbrand's. Steel rang, slick with rain. Marbrand pushed hard, stronger, heavier, trying to drive Robb back. Robb felt his arms strain, felt mud tug at its horse's legs. Then the Great John crashed in from the side with a roar that made even seasoned knights flinch. His axe took a Lannister guard in the chest, plate and bone breaking together, and the guard went down like a felled tree. Great John's horse barreled into the ring, splitting it. "Wolf King," Great John bellowed, as if the title were already true. Marbrand's eyes flicked toward the Great John, one fatal glance. Robb used it. He twisted his sword, slid it along Marbrand's guard, and struck the man's shoulder with the edge, hard enough to numb and break. Marbrand cursed and fell back, his sword slipping from wet fingers. Tywin's horse reared suddenly, struck by an arrow that buried itself deep in its flank. The beast screamed and bucked. Tywin clenched his knees, trying to control it, but the animal's pain was bigger than discipline. It came down hard, slipped in the mire, and collapsed sideways, pinning Tywin's leg beneath its weight. For the first time, something like anger cracked Tywin's composure. Not fear, never fear, but rage at the indignity of mud and blood daring to touch him. Robb dismounted without thinking. He hit the ground in a splash of cold water. His boots sank. He waded toward Tywin as men fought all around, as screams rose and fell, as arrows continued to hiss from the ridge. A Lannister guard rushed at him. Robb raised his sword. Before the guard could strike, Gray Wind lunged and tore the man's throat open with one savage shake. Blood fountained, hot against rain. Robb reached Tywin. The old lion was half-trapped beneath the dying horse, cloak smeared with mud, one hand braced against the ground. His face was furious, and even in that fury there was a terrible dignity, as if the world should apologize to him for forcing him to kneel. Robb put the point of his sword against Tywin's throat. Tywin's eyes lifted to meet his. They were pale, and in them Robb saw not a father desperate for his son, not a commander begging for mercy, but a man who had built his life on the certainty that he could not be brought low by boys in wet woods. "Robb Stark," Tywin said, voice steady despite the chaos around them. "So the wolf has teeth." Robb's breath came in hard pulls. His sword hand trembled, not from fear but from the shock of possibility. He could end this. He could kill Tywin Lannister here, in the mud, and let the Riverlands drink the lion's blood. Behind him, Rickard Karstark's men were closing in, eyes bright with murder. Greatjon's laughter thundered. Roose Bolton's archers were still sending death down from the ridge with calm precision. Robb pressed the sword a fraction closer. "Yield," he said, "or die." Tywin's gaze flicked once, taking in the ring of enemies, the dire wolf, the mud that held him. His jaw tightened. Then, very slowly, Tywin Lannister spread his empty hand. "I yield," he said, as if the words tasted like ash. A sound went through the Northmen. Not cheers, not yet, but a breath of disbelief. Men stopped for half a heartbeat to stare, and in that heartbeat the battle shifted decisively. The Lannister guards faltered, and faltering in a trap was death. Robb stepped back and raised his voice, raw with rain. "Take him alive!" Rickard Karstark's face twisted as if he had been struck, but he obeyed. Chains were brought. Tywin was hauled free from the dying horse with brutal hands. Mud streaked his face. His cloak tore. He did not cry out. He did not plead. He only stared at Robb Stark with a look that promised something cold and enduring. In the rain-drowned hush that followed, Robb felt the forest exhale, and he knew the war had just taken a turn that no Maester's ink could properly explain. When the fighting died, it did not end cleanly. It faded in pockets. One last horse shrieking as it bled out. One last man begging for a mercy that came too late. One last clash of steel where someone refused to believe the battle was over. But slowly the forest reclaimed its silence, swallowing the human noise as it had swallowed countless other cries in the long, wet centuries before. Tywin Lannister stood among Northmen as if he were a stone placed in a river. The current flowed around him, hostile, eager, but he did not move with it. Chains ringed his wrists. A Stark man held the links in a white-knuckled grip as though Tywin might break iron by will alone. Robb's men looked at Tywin with a kind of hungry awe. They had fought knights and levies and sellswords. They had not expected to catch the lion's head itself. Rickard Karstark stepped close enough that his breath could reach Tywin. "My sons," he said, voice low and deadly, "Torrhen and Eddard, killed under Lannister command." Tywin's eyes slid to him without warmth. "Many sons have died in this war." Karstark's hand trembled at his sword hilt. "Say their names." Tywin's mouth did not change. "No." A growl rose from gray wind, not loud, but deep, vibrating through the air like distant thunder. Men shifted uneasily. Robb lifted a hand. "Not here," he said, and forced his voice to carry authority he did not always feel. "Not now." Karstark's stare burned into Robb as if trying to test him. For a moment Robb feared the man might disobey. Then Karstark's shoulders jerked in a stiff, unwilling nod, and he stepped back, swallowing his rage like poison. The Great John spat into the mud. "He'll hang, soon as we get him to Riverrun." Robb met his gaze. "He'll live," Robb said. "For now." The Great John's face contorted, half outrage, half confusion. "Live? After all he's done?" Robb forced himself to look again at Tywin Lannister. Tywin's face was wet with rain, hair darkened, a smear of mud across one cheekbone, and still he looked like a man born to sit in a hall where others stood. "Because he's worth more alive than dead," Robb said. "Because Sansa Stark is still in King's Landing. Because my sisters don't deserve to pay for our vengeance." Tywin's eyes narrowed slightly, the smallest sign of interest. "A sentimental boy," he murmured, as if speaking to himself. Robb's jaw tightened. "A brother," Robb corrected. They bound Tywin tighter, adding a second chain across his elbows, forcing his hands awkwardly close to his chest. It was meant to humiliate. It did not. Tywin walked with his head high as they began the slow movement northwest toward Riverrun, through rain and mud and the broken remnants of a Lannister party that had thought itself untouchable. Jaime Lannister was brought too, still in chains, still furious, but now his fury had changed shape. He stared at his father as if seeing him for the first time. The Kingslayer had always been a man who believed his own blade could solve any problem. Now he walked beside a problem his blade could not cut. Tywin did not look at Jaime. He did not offer comfort, reassurance, anger. He offered nothing at all, and that nothing was worse than scolding. Jaime's mouth tightened, and he stumbled once in the mud, catching himself before he fell. No one helped him. Robb rode at the head with the Blackfish. Brynden Tully's face was set, eyes scanning the woods as if expecting the trees themselves to strike. "If word gets out," Brynden said, "you'll have half the realm trying to kill you before you reach Riverrun. Every Sellsword and bannerman with ambition will see a chance to end the war in one blow." "We keep it quiet," Robb said. "Quiet doesn't live long," Brynden replied. "Not with men like yours." Behind them, men whispered anyway. They whispered of Tywin in chains. They whispered of Jaime and Tywin both caught, lion cub and lion sire. They whispered of Ned Stark's head on a spike, and now the wolf's teeth biting back. And in whispers, victory grew claws. Rain turned to a thin mist as daylight rose. The Riverlands unfolded around them. Fields trodden into ruin, farmhouses blackened, crows circling where carrion lay. Robb had ridden through villages where women stared at him with hollow eyes, where children did not run toward banners because they had learned banners meant hunger. He had promised in his heart that he would make it right. Now he had Tywin Lannister. At a small stream crossing, the column halted briefly to let horses drink. Tywin was kept standing. The men guarding him did not let him sit. They watched him as if he were a snake that might strike even bound. Robb dismounted and approached. "Do you understand what's happened?" Robb asked quietly. Tywin's eyes moved over him, measuring. "You've won a battle," Tywin said. "Boy kings win battles all the time." Robb's fingers tightened on his glove. "I've captured you." Tywin's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more the suggestion of one. "And now you believe the war has ended." Robb's voice went cold. "No. Now I believe it can be steered." Tywin studied him for a long moment. Rainwater slid down the old lion's nose. He did not blink it away. "Do you know what steering costs?" Tywin asked. Robb did not answer at once. He thought of his father, of honor. He thought of his mother, of wisdom hard-won. He thought of Winterfell's ancient stones, of the direwolves in its yard, of the Godswood's silent face. "I'm learning," Robb said. Tywin's gaze flicked toward Grey Wind, who had appeared silently nearby. The direwolf's eyes were fixed on Tywin with a patient, predatory calm. Tywin looked back at Robb. "Learn quickly," Tywin said. "The realm eats boys." Robb rose, mounting again. The column moved on, and Riverrun's towers waited ahead like a promise, of safety, of counsel, of choices that would stain a man's hands no matter which way he turned. Riverrun smelled like damp stone and river mist, like old fires banked deep and the faint sweetness of wet grass. Catelyn Stark stood on the bridge with her hands clasped so tightly her fingers ached. She had watched armies come and go from these gates since she was a girl. Tully banners bright in summer sun, knights laughing, her father's voice echoing in the yard. Now she watched her son return from war with something in tow that made the air itself feel strange. Edmure Tully's face had gone pale. Brynden's jaw was set in that familiar stubborn line. Men crowded behind them, riverlords and guardsmen craning for a better look, disbelief written across every face. At first Catelyn saw only mud-streaked horses and exhausted riders, banners limp with rain. Then she saw Robb at the front, cloak soaked through, his face sharper than she remembered. He looked older than the boy she had kissed goodbye. And behind him, the world narrowed to a single image, impossible and undeniable. Tywin Lannister walking in chains beneath the walls of House Tully, his cloak torn, his hands bound, his head held high as if the chain were a poor imitation of a crown. Beside him, Jaime Lannister, golden hair dark with rain, eyes furious, mouth twisted in a bitterness too proud to break. Catelyn's breath caught. It was not triumph that rose in her, it was fear. Not fear of Tywin in chains, but fear of what such a capture meant. The gods did not give gifts without demanding payment. Robb dismounted at the bridge and strode toward her. For a heartbeat, mother and son simply stared at one another. Catelyn saw mud on his boots, a smear of blood on his sleeve that had dried brown. She saw the way his shoulders held tension, as if he were braced for a blow. "Mother," Robb said. Catelyn reached out and touched his face, just once, fingertips brushing cold skin. "Robb," she whispered, and then, because she was a Tully and a Stark and a woman who had learned to turn shock into questions, she looked past him at Tywin. "How?" Robb's mouth tightened. "He came for Jaime," Robb said. "He thought he could take him back." Edmure Tully let out a strangled laugh, half joy, half awe. "The gods have a sense of humor after all." "The gods have a sense of cruelty," Brynden corrected, and his eyes did not leave Tywin. Tywin stopped at the edge of the bridge and looked up at Riverrun's walls as if assessing stonework for a siege. His expression did not change. The chain on his wrists clinked softly. Edmure stepped forward, voice loud with the need to claim this moment. "Tywin Lannister," he called. "Welcome to Riverrun. How do you like our hospitality?" Tywin's gaze slid to him, cold as river water in winter. "I've slept in worse," Tywin said. Murmurs rose. Anger sparked. A Tully man shouted an insult. Another spat at Tywin's feet. Tywin did not react, as if spit and chains were both beneath notice. Robb lifted a hand. "No," he said, voice cutting through the noise. "Not here. He's our prisoner. He's valuable." "Valuable?" a river lord snarled. "My village is ash because of him. And mine," another growled. "My brother's head is on a pike because of him." Catelyn felt the rage crowding close, felt it pressing like bodies in a narrow hall. She stepped in, voice firm. "Enough," she said, and was startled to hear how much her own father sounded in her tone. "He's here, alive. We can use that, or we can throw it away and gain nothing but a brief taste of blood." Ricard Karstark's eyes burned holes through her. "My sons." "I know," Catelyn said softly, and her heart ached. "But we are not butchers." Robb's gaze flicked to her, gratitude and strain mingled. He turned toward his men. "Take them inside," he ordered. "Separate cells, strong doors. No visitors without my word." As the guards moved, Jaime jerked his chained hands. "Robb Stark," he spat. "If you think you can hold my father." Robb stepped close, voice low enough only Jaime could hear. "I already am," Robb said. Jaime's mouth snapped shut. For the first time, uncertainty cracked his fury. They crossed the bridge into Riverrun's yard. The castle swallowed them, stone walls, wet flags, men pressing close. Tywin walked without stumbling, even when the cobbles were slick. He did not look left or right. He did not give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing him notice their hate. Catelyn followed Robb into the hall, hearing the castle's murmurs swell behind them like a rising tide. Every eye followed Tywin Lannister as he vanished into the stairwell leading down to the cells. When the door closed behind the last guard, silence fell heavy in the great hall. The fire in the hearth crackled, loud as a shout. Robb turned to face his lords. The boy was gone. In his place stood a king in everything but name, and the weight of what he held in his hands was enough to bend the room around him. "We have Tywin Lannister," Robb said. "Now we must decide what to do with him." The War Council felt like a different kind of battle, one fought with tongues and pride instead of steel. Men crowded the table, leaning over maps that were already smeared by damp fingers and candle wax. The trident and its forks were ink lines. The riverlands were little marks that represented villages now burned. The King's Road ran like a scar down the parchment. Robb stood at the head, hands braced on the table. Catelyn sat to his right, her posture straight, her face composed in a way she had learned from years of court and grief. Brynden Tully paced at the edge, restless as a caged hawk. Edmure hovered between excitement and dread, as if his own castle had become a dream he feared would break. Greatjon Umber slammed a fist down. "Hang him," he growled. "Hang him from the walls for all to see. Let the lions know what it is to lose their teeth." Rickard Karstark's voice was quieter and far more dangerous. "Not hanging," he said. "The sword, in the yard, before the men, before the gods. Let him see a Stark do justice." Roose Bolton smiled faintly, as if amused by the simplicity. "Justice," he murmured, "is a word that tastes different to different men." Catelyn's gaze snapped to him. Roose's smile did not change. Robb lifted his head. "If we kill him," Robb said, "what happens to my sisters?" A hush settled, reluctant and heavy. Even Greatjon's rage faltered at the name of Sansa. "They'd never harm a hostage," Edmure offered quickly, hope clumsy in his voice. "Not with. They cut my father's head off," Robb said, and the words landed like stones. "They'll harm anyone if it serves them." Catelyn's hands tightened in her lap. The memory of Ned's last day was a knife that never dulled. She forced herself to speak calmly. "Tywin is worth more than vengeance," she said. "He is leverage. He is a key." "A key can be broken," Karstark said, eyes hard, "and broken keys still hurt to swallow." Brynden stopped pacing and leaned over the map. "We're thinking too small," he said. "With Tywin, we can force terms. We can force withdrawals. We can force them to return Sansa and Arya." "Arya is missing," Catelyn said, voice catching despite herself. Brynden's gaze softened briefly. "Aye, but Sansa is in their claws, and Tywin can pry those claws open." Roose Bolton's pale eyes drifted over the map toward the Crownlands. "Or he can be used," Roose said, "as bait." Greatjon barked a laugh. "Bait? For what? Another lion?" "For King's Landing itself," Roose replied, voice mild. "Imagine the city's panic when they learn their true ruler sits in a dungeon beneath a river castle. Gold will change hands. Words will change allegiances. Men who feared Tywin will begin to dream. Dreams," Brynden muttered, "are dangerous." Robb stared down at the inked lines that represented roads he had bled on. "We send terms," Robb said at last. "We demand Sansa's return. We demand the crown withdraw from the Riverlands. We demand the mountain and his men delivered for justice. We demand recognition." He hesitated. The word caught in his throat because saying it made it real. Catelyn watched him, heart pounding. "Recognition that the North is not theirs to rule," Robb finished. A murmur surged. Some faces lit with fierce approval. Others tightened with fear. Independence was a blade with two edges. Could cut chains. Could also cut alliances. Edmure's eyes shone. "King in the North," he whispered, as if tasting the title. Greatjon grinned, pleased as if the world had finally begun to make sense. "About time." Roose Bolton's expression remained unreadable. "And if they refuse?" he asked softly. Robb's voice went hard. "Then Tywin stays in chains, and we make the war hurt. We raid the Westerlands. We bleed their gold. We starve their pride." Karstark's nostrils flared. "And Jaime?" he demanded. "Do we keep the Kingslayer too? Or do we trade him for our girls?" Catelyn felt her heart twist. Jaime had pushed Bran from a tower. Jaime had murdered Ned in everything but name. And yet Sansa's face rose in her mind, bright and innocent, now trapped in a nest of vipers. "We trade," Catelyn said, and surprised herself by the steadiness of her own voice. "We trade Jaime for Sansa if we can. We trade Tywin for peace, if peace can be bought." Greatjon scoffed. "Peace bought with lions?" he spat. "Peace bought with our blood?" Catelyn shot back and the hall went still. Her eyes were wet, and she did not care. "How many more sons must die so you can watch an old man choke?" Robb's gaze met hers, and in that look Catelyn saw the war he fought inside. Between honor and need, between the boy who wanted to be good and the king who had to be effective. A raven croaked from its perch near the window, as if impatient with human argument. Brynden exhaled. "Write your terms," he said to Robb. "Send them fast, before the city has time to invent a story that makes this less real." Robb nodded. "We send a message today," he said. "And Tywin?" Roose Bolton asked. Robb's hand tightened on the table edge. "Tywin remains alive," Robb said, "until Sansa is safely home, until the Riverlands are safe, until the lions understand they cannot do whatever they please." Outside, rain beat the stone like relentless fingers. Inside, a boy who had become a war leader took quill and parchment and began to write words that would shake thrones. The dungeons beneath Riverrun were colder than the hall above. Stone sweated. Water dripped in slow, patient taps that sounded like time itself counting down. The torchlight threw trembling shadows across iron bars and damp walls, making everything look alive in the wrong way. Robb descended the steps with Catelyn behind him. Two guards opened the cell door with a grating squeal of iron. The sound echoed. Tywin Lannister sat on a narrow bench, back straight, hands resting on his knees as if he were waiting in a lord's solar rather than a cell. Chains lay across his wrists and ankles. He did not slouch. He did not pace. He did not look like a man imprisoned so much as a man enduring an inconvenience. Robb stepped inside. Gray wind followed silently, filling the small space with the presence of something that belonged to wild places. Tywin's gaze flicked to the dire wolf and back again without visible flinch, but Robb saw a minute tightening at the corner of his mouth. Disapproval, perhaps, at being forced to share air with an animal that could kill him faster than any sword. "You've come," Tywin said. Robb did not offer greetings. "I've written terms," he said. "They'll be sent to King's Landing. You can advise your family to accept." Tywin's eyes were pale, unblinking. "You believe you can command my family?" "I believe I can pressure them," Robb said. "And you know the difference." A faint, dry sound left Tywin. Almost a laugh, but stripped of warmth. "Pressure," Tywin said. "From a boy who has never sat a council, never negotiated a marriage contract, never held a city's grain supply in his hands." Robb felt anger stir, but he kept it leashed. "From a boy who holds you," Robb said. Tywin's gaze sharpened. "And what do you think that gives you?" Tywin asked. "A victory? A kingdom? Respect?" "It gives me time," Robb said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "It gives me a chance to save my sister without begging. It gives the Riverlands a chance to breathe." Tywin leaned forward slightly, chain links shifting. "Time cuts both ways," Tywin said. "While you sit here believing you have ended the game, other players move." Catelyn's voice came tight. "Renly Baratheon," she said. "Stannis Baratheon. Balon Greyjoy. Yes, we know." Tywin's eyes slid to her. "Lady Stark," he said, and there was something in his tone that might have been respect, or might have been the practiced courtesy he offered to anyone he considered useful. "You understand at least that this war is not a simple thing. Your son," he looked back to Robb, "your son believes he can take what he wants with a sword and a hostage." Robb's jaw clenched. "You took what you wanted with fire," Robb said, "with men like Gregor Clegane unleashed on villages. Don't speak to me of simplicity." For the first time, Tywin's composure cracked enough to show the faintest hint of irritation. "War is brutality," Tywin said flatly. "Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a song." "And you've always bought brutality," Robb replied. "That's why the realm fears you." "Fear keeps order," Tywin said. "Fear breeds knives," Robb said, and thought of his father again. Honor cut down by fear and ambition. Tywin studied him. In the torchlight, the lines of his face looked carved deeper, as if the dungeon's damp cold had aged him in hours. "You think yourself clever," Tywin said. "You think capturing me makes you equal to me." Robb felt gray wind shift behind him, the direwolf's breath soft and steady. He drew strength from it, from the silent loyalty that did not ask questions. "I don't need to be equal to you," Robb said. I need to win. Tywin's eyes narrowed. And what is winning? He asked. A crown? A declaration? A piece of parchment that says the North is free? Freedom is not granted by words. It is maintained by power. Do you have enough power to keep what you claim when you have to feed your men through winter? When your bannermen grow tired? When alliances rot? Catelyn's heart tightened. Tywin's words were not simply taunts. They were blades aimed at the truth. Robb held Tywin's gaze. I have the North, Robb said, and I have the Riverlands, and I have you. Tywin's mouth curved faintly. You have me, he agreed. For now. Robb stepped closer. You want to speak of alliances? Robb asked. Then speak to your daughter. Tell her if she harms Sansa, you die. Tell your grandson if he wants to play at being king, he'll learn what it costs. Tywin's eyes did not soften at the mention of family. Joffrey is a boy, he said. Boys are impulsive. Then remind him, Robb said. Because if Sansa returns to me broken, I will make your death slow enough for you to regret ever teaching anyone that fear is order. Catelyn inhaled sharply at the hardness in Robb's voice. Tywin watched Robb as if seeing, at last, the shape of the man he might become. You threaten me, Tywin said, not offended, only noting. I promise you, Robb corrected. For a moment, the dungeon held only the sound of water dripping and torch flame licking air. Grey Wind's eyes glinted in shadow. Tywin's gaze flicked once toward the direwolf again, then returned to Robb. You are your father's son, Tywin said at last, and there was something coldly admiring in it. But you are learning something your father never did. Robb's mouth tightened. What's that? Tywin's eyes were ice. That honor is not enough. Robb felt the words strike. He did not answer. He turned and left the cell, Catelyn following, the guards slamming the door behind them with a final metallic clang that echoed like a sentence. As they climbed the stairs, Catelyn reached for Robb's sleeve. Robb, she whispered, and when he looked at her, she saw the boy behind the king again, exhausted and frightened beneath the armor of resolve. We'll bring her home, Robb said, voice rough. We will. Catelyn nodded, though the gods gave no guarantees. Above them, Riverrun waited, and, beyond its walls, the realm shifted, already reacting to the shock of a lion in chains. King's Landing did not smell like rain. It smelled like too many people pressed together. Sweat and sewage and spice and cooked meat. The stink of life piled on life beneath the Red Keep's shadow. When the Raven arrived, its wings beat the air like a warning. Cersei Lannister read the letter once, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. Her fingers tightened until the parchment creased. For a heartbeat she could not breathe. Joffrey snatched at it. What is it? He demanded, petulant and sharp. Who writes so early? Cersei held it away. It's nothing, she lied, and heard how thin it sounded. Varys stood with hands folded, face sympathetic in the way of a man who enjoyed other people's pain. Peter Baelish lounged as if the council chamber were a brothel he owned. Grand Maester Pycelle blinked, slow and useless. Then the door opened behind them, and Tyrion Lannister entered with rain on his shoulders, eyes quick and bright. He had arrived in the city like a man who knew the house was on fire and he was the only one with water. Sister, Tyrion said lightly, and then he saw her face and the lightness died. What? Cersei thrust the letter at him. Tyrion read. His mouth tightened as the words sank in. He did not gasp. He did not shout. But his eyes, for a rare moment, showed something close to shock. Tywin Lannister captured. Held at Riverrun. Jaime Lannister also captive. Terms demanded. Sansa Stark named. Joffrey saw Tyrion's expression and flew into rage at once, because rage was his first language. It's a lie, he shouted. Robb Stark is a traitor boy. He can't have my grandfather. Cersei's voice came out brittle. He does, she whispered, as if saying it too loudly would make it true in a way she could not bear. Pycelle made a wheezing sound. This is unprecedented. Everything is unprecedented when you're incompetent, Tyrion snapped, and then forced himself to breathe. He looked at Cersei. How did this happen? Cersei's hands trembled. He ambushed him, she said, hate thick in her tone. In the woods, like bandits. Bandits with an old lion in chains. Littlefinger murmured, smiling. What a story. The city will adore it. Shut your mouth, Cersei hissed. Varys made a small gesture, palms up. The small folk already whisper, he said softly. They whisper that Lord Tywin was the true king. They will whisper louder now. Joffrey shoved a goblet off the table. It shattered. I'll have Stark's head, he screamed. I'll have both of them. Tyrion stepped forward, voice cutting. You will do nothing, he said, and the room went still because no one spoke to Joffrey like that without consequences. Tyrion held Joffrey's gaze without flinching. If you harm the girl, father dies, Tyrion said, each word deliberate. And if father dies, this city loses the only man who can keep the wolves and stags from tearing your crown off your head. Joffrey's face reddened, eyes wet with fury. He's my grandfather, he spat. He's not. He is everything, Tyrion interrupted. And you're a child with a crown too heavy for your neck. Cersei's eyes flashed murder at Tyrion, but she did not contradict him. Because she knew, beneath her pride and spite, she knew the truth. Tywin was the spine of their house. Without him, they were a snake without bones. What do they want? Cersei asked, voice tight. Tyrion held up the letter. They want Sansa, he said. They want the Riverlands free of our men. They want the mountain delivered like a pig to slaughter. They want... He hesitated. They want recognition, independence. Littlefinger's smile widened. A kingdom torn away, he said. The realm fracturing. How delightful. Varys's eyes glimmered. How dangerous, he corrected gently. Cersei's face twisted. We can't give them. We can, Tyrion said, and Cersei stared at him as if he had struck her. Tyrion's voice stayed calm. Not all, but enough to get father back. We can trade Sansa. We can promise withdrawals and delay them. We can offer gold, titles, lies, whatever buys time. And the mountain? Cersei snapped. Gregor is loyal. Gregor was not loyal to Cersei. Gregor was loyal to bloodshed and coin, but she needed to believe he was hers. Tyrion's mouth tightened. We can't give them Gregor, he said, and he knew it as a hard truth. The mountain was too dangerous a witness to too many crimes. But we can offer someone else. A scapegoat, a lesser beast. Joffrey's voice came sharp again. I won't give the girl to them, he snarled. She's mine. Tyrion's eyes flicked toward Varys, toward Littlefinger. Two men who would use this chaos like a ladder. If you keep her, Tyrion said carefully, you will lose your grandfather. And then you may lose your throne. Cersei's nails bit into her palms. She looked at the letter again as if it were an enemy. If father dies, she whispered, there will be no forgiveness. There will be no father, Tyrion corrected. Silence fell. Outside, the city went on unaware for a few more breaths. Vendors shouting, bells ringing, children running. But inside the Red Keep, the Lannisters felt the ground shift beneath them. The wolf had not just bitten them. The wolf had taken their heart. And somewhere far away, Tywin Lannister sat in a dungeon and waited, while his children tried to decide how much of the realm they would burn to get him back. Back in Riverrun, the castle's stone held its own secrets. It always had. Catelyn knew every corridor, every drafty stairwell, every place a servant could hide to listen. She also knew that war made a castle stranger. Men who had never set foot in these halls now slept in them, whispered in them, plotted in them with the casual entitlement of soldiers who believed walls belonged to whoever had the most swords. She moved through the torchlit passage above the cells with her cloak wrapped tight, hands cold despite the heat of flame. Below, Tywin Lannister sat behind iron, and the knowledge of it felt like a storm trapped under stone. Quiet for now, but pressing. Robb had sent his raven. The terms had flown south on black wings. Now there was nothing to do but wait, and waiting was a torture Catelyn had never mastered. She heard voices as she neared the stair, low, careful. She slowed, steps soft on stone, and leaned just enough to see down into the corridor below. Roose Bolton stood there, half-shadow, speaking to one of the guards assigned to the dungeon. The guard was young, face tense, eyes darting as if afraid someone might see him talking to a lord who was not his. Catelyn's stomach tightened. Roose's voice was calm, almost kindly. "A long watch," he was saying. "Cold work. You must be tired." The guard swallowed. "My lord." Roose tilted his head. "The prisoners," he said. "Are they quiet?" The guard said. "The old one sits and stares. The other, Jaime Lannister, he curses. He makes promises. He tries to bargain." Roose nodded slowly, as if cataloging details. "Men with gold always bargain," he murmured. "Be careful what you accept. There are payments that cost more than coin." The guard shifted, uneasy. "I won't take their gold." Roose's pale eyes watched him. "Good," he said. "Then take my advice instead. Watch the old one's eyes. He'll tell you what he's thinking before his mouth does." Catelyn drew back before she could be seen. Her pulse hammered. It was not that Roose Bolton's words were openly treasonous. It was that Roose Bolton had no reason to be down there at all. Not unless he wanted something. She moved away, mind racing, and tried to remind herself that suspicion could become its own poison. Roose had served House Stark. He had marched at Robb's command. He had bled men at the Green Fork. And yet there were stories about the Dreadfort. Stories told softly in the north, where winter nights made people whisper of flayed skin and cold cruelty. Catelyn did not know how much of those stories were truth, and how much were fear, but fear had roots in something. Below, behind iron, Tywin Lannister sat very still. When Roose Bolton walked away, Tywin's eyes followed him through the bars. There was no expression on Tywin's face, but the stillness itself felt like calculation. Gray wind lay outside Tywin's cell door, head on paws, eyes half-lidded. He looked like a sleeping beast, but Catelyn had seen him stir for smaller threats than a man's ambition. The direwolf's presence was a comfort and a warning. Wolves were loyal, yes, but wolves were also watchful, and watchfulness was what this castle needed now more than ever. Catelyn found Robb in the yard later, speaking with the blackfish near the stables. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and cold. Robb's hair was damp, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Robb," Catelyn said softly. He turned, and the relief on his face at seeing her alive and unhurt was so sharp it pained her. "Mother." She hesitated, then chose her words carefully, because a king's mind could not be burdened with every fear. "Roose Bolton was in the dungeon corridor," she said, speaking to the guards. Robb's brow furrowed. "Why?" "I don't know," Catelyn admitted, "but I don't like it." Bryndon's mouth tightened. "Bolton's a careful man," he said. "Careful men make me nervous." Robb stared at the ground for a moment, jaw working. "I need him," Robb said finally. "For now. I need every lord." "And every lord needs something," Catelyn replied gently. "Remember that." Robb's gaze lifted to hers, and she saw the strain again. The way the war forced him to think like Tywin Lannister even as he fought Tywin Lannister. "I will," Robb promised. That night, the castle's ravens shifted restlessly, as if sensing the tension in the air. Men drank in the halls, celebrating the capture, singing songs that made victory sound simple and bright. But in the darkness beneath, Tywin sat and listened, to footsteps, to murmurs, to the faint vibrations of life above. He was a prisoner, yes, but prisoners could still plant seeds. And seeds in the right soil could grow into knives. Dawn came pale and reluctant, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over a realm this broken. The sky above Riverrun was the color of milk left too long in the cold, thin and gray. A wind moved over the rivers, carrying the smell of wet reeds and distant smoke. Robb Stark stood on the battlements with his cloak drawn tight. The stone beneath his boots was slick with damp. He could see the river gliding beneath the bridge, indifferent, patient. Water did not care who wore crowns. It flowed anyway. Catelyn stood at his side, face turned toward the horizon where the road to King's Landing vanished beyond hills and burned fields. Brynden Tully leaned on the parapet, eyes narrowed, as if he could see armies moving in the distance even when the land looked still. A guard approached with a raven in gloved hands. The bird's feathers were glossy, its eyes bright. It shifted, impatient, sensing the open sky above. Robb held the sealed letter for a moment before tying it to the raven's leg. The wax was stamped with the direwolf of Stark, black on gray, an old symbol pressed into fresh promise. He had written carefully. Every word had been weighed, tested, sharpened. Return Sansa Stark unharmed. Withdraw forces from the Riverlands. Deliver Gregor Clegane and those who burned and butchered under Lannister orders. Acknowledge the North's right to choose its own king. And beneath it all, the unspoken sentence. Or Tywin Lannister dies. Robb's fingers lingered on the raven's leg after the knot was tied, as if he could feel the message's weight traveling through bone and feather. Then he lifted his hand and released the bird. The raven launched into the air, wings beating hard. It rose, a black speck against pale sky, and for a moment Robb felt as if his heart had gone with it. Flying south, flying toward lions and lies and a city that had already devoured one Stark. Catelyn's hand brushed his arm, light but steady. "She'll come home," she whispered, more prayer than certainty. Robb watched the raven until it was only a shadow in distance. "She has to," he said, voice rough. Below them, in the courtyard, men moved about their morning tasks, checking tack, sharpening blades, carrying barrels, laughing too loudly. They looked up as the raven flew, and some of them raised fists, as if they could punch the sky with victory. Robb did not raise his fist. He did not cheer. He felt the war's shape changing under his feet like a shifting floor. Capturing Tywin had not ended danger. It had concentrated it. It had drawn every hungry eye in the realm toward Riverrun, toward the boy king who dared hold the lion. "Do you regret it?" Brynden asked quietly, not looking at Robb. Robb's gaze stayed on the horizon. "No," Robb said. Then, after a breath, he added truthfully, "I fear it." Brynden nodded once. "Good," he said. "Fear keeps a man alive." Catelyn looked at her son and saw Ned in him. His stubbornness, his sense of duty. But she also saw something else now, the willingness to play the game her husband had despised. The willingness to hold an enemy hostage and mean it. Down below, beneath Riverrun stone, Tywin Lannister sat behind iron bars and listened to the castle wake. He did not know the exact words Robb had sent, but he knew their nature. He knew a message had flown south. He knew the realm would answer. In another cell, Jaime Lannister paced like a caged lion, fury burning holes in the dark. He had shouted himself hoarse, threatened guards, promised gold, promised death, promised anything. None of it changed the iron. Above, Robb drew a slow breath, tasting cold air, and let his hand rest on the stone as if to ground himself. He was 15, and he held the fate of his house between his fingers like a blade. Somewhere south, Sansa Stark waited in a nest of vipers. Somewhere east, other kings gathered their strength. Somewhere north, Winterfell stood under a sky that would soon turn white. Robb Stark did not know what the Raven would bring back. Peace, trickery, war sharpened into something worse. But he knew this. The North would not bow quietly again. He turned from the battlements and began to descend into the castle, toward councils and choices and the damp cold where lions waited in chains, and the war, restless, hungry, waited to see what kind of king a wolf boy would become. Sansa had learned that fear had many faces, and most of them wore silk. The Red Keep's rooms were warm, but she could never stop shivering. The warmth was the wrong kind of warmth, like a fever that made your mind swim and your stomach turn. Outside her window, the city sprawled, brown roofs and twisting alleys, smoke curling into a gray sky, alive and loud, as if 1,000 voices could drown the sound of one girl's heart breaking. When the raven came, she did not see it. She only felt the change. The castle's mood shifted like a candle guttering in a draft. Servants stopped smiling in the corridors. Guards stood straighter. Men spoke in tighter voices, as if the walls had ears that now belonged to someone else. Cersei arrived with her court face fixed in place, eyes too bright. Joffrey followed, restless, as if he could smell blood in the air and it made him hungry. Sansa stood because she was told to stand. She folded her hands because her fingers shook and she did not want them to see. Cersei held a parchment. The queen's nails pressed into it, leaving little dents in the paper as if she meant to wound the message itself. "Well," Cersei said, voice sweet with poison, "it seems your brother has surprised us all." Sansa's throat went dry. "Robb," she managed. Joffrey snatched the parchment from his mother's hand and skimmed it like a bored child forced to read a Septon's lesson. His face turned a furious red. "Lies," he spat. "All lies." Cersei's smile did not reach her eyes. "Not lies," she said softly. "A wolf trap. Your brother," she lingered on the word brother as if it were an insult, "has taken something from us." Sansa's pulse hammered so hard she felt it in her teeth. "What?" The queen watched her, and for a heartbeat Sansa thought she saw a flicker of something not quite hatred, not quite pity. Then it was gone. "My father," Cersei said. "Tywin." The name struck Sansa like a slap. Tywin Lannister was a presence she had felt even without ever seeing him. He was the shadow behind Cersei's cruelty, the weight that steadied the Lannister world. If he could be taken, then perhaps the world was not as fixed as it felt. Joffrey crumpled the parchment in his fist. "I'll have Robb Stark's head," he hissed. "I'll send it back wrapped in wolf fur." Sansa heard herself breathe. She heard her own voice, small and careful, slip out of her as if it belonged to someone else. "If Lord Tywin is taken," she said, "won't you need?" Joffrey's eyes snapped to her. "Need what?" Sansa forced herself to swallow. "Need to be careful," she said. Joffrey stepped toward her. His face was close enough that she could see the tiny flecks of spittle at the corners of his mouth, the way his lips trembled with rage. "You think you can advise me?" he said softly, and that softness was worse than shouting. Cersei's hand closed around Joffrey's wrist. "Enough," she said, the first real command in her voice. "Not here." Joffrey yanked away, glaring as if his mother had betrayed him. "She's a traitor," he said. "Her brother is a traitor. I should have her tongue." Sansa's stomach clenched. She made herself stand still. She made herself remember her songs, her courtesies, the armor she had left, manners. The door opened behind them, and Tyrion Lannister entered with rain on his cloak and a look on his face that was not quite anger and not quite amusement. Something sharper. He bowed slightly because he was still careful, but his eyes went to Sansa at once as if taking her measure, checking whether she still stood. "So," Tyrion said, voice light as a blade, "it's true. Father has finally discovered what it feels like to be inconvenienced." Cersei's gaze turned cold. "This is not the time for your jokes." "It's never the time for my jokes," Tyrion replied. "And yet, here we all are, suffering them anyway." Joffrey thrust the crumpled parchment at him. "Fix it," he snapped. "You're the clever one. Fix it." Tyrion took the paper, smoothed it with his fingers, and read as if he had not already done so somewhere else. When he looked up, his eyes were thoughtful. "The boy has ambition," he said. "I'll give him that." Cersei's voice was tight. "He has my father. And Jaime," Tyrion added, and the way he said it, flat, controlled, made Sansa's heart twist. Jaime, who had stood at Joffrey's side like a golden shield, now trapped like an animal. Joffrey's gaze flicked to Sansa. "We should kill her," he said casually, as if suggesting a change of dinner. "Send her head back with a note." Sansa's vision narrowed. For a moment she could not feel her fingers. She waited for the blow of panic, waited for herself to crumble. She did not. Something inside her, some cold little knot, held. Tyrion's voice cut through the air like a snapped whip. "No," he said. Joffrey blinked, shocked by the defiance. "What did you say?" "I said no," Tyrion repeated, stepping closer. He was smaller than Joffrey imagined himself, bent in ways Joffrey despised. But there was something in Tyrion's eyes that made even princes hesitate. "If you harm the girl, father dies," Tyrion said. "And if father dies, you may as well take that crown off your head and hand it to one of the Baratheon brothers, because you won't keep it." Cersei's face tightened with fury. "Tyrion, listen," Tyrion said, turning to her, voice low. "We don't have the luxury of pride. Not now." Sansa stared at Tyrion as if he were speaking a foreign language. She had expected cruelty. She had expected threats. She had not expected someone to say plainly what she had been too afraid to hope. That her life mattered to the game, at least for now. Cersei's eyes flicked to Sansa, then away as if she could not bear to look at her. "What do they want?" Cersei demanded, the question ripped from her by necessity. Tyrion's gaze sharpened. "They want Sansa back," he said. He studied the queen, then Joffrey, then Sansa. "And for once," Tyrion added, "we should consider giving them what they want." Joffrey's face twisted in outrage. "I won't." Tyrion looked at him with weary contempt. "Then you'll bury your grandfather," he said. "And you'll explain to the court why the lions are suddenly toothless." Sansa's breath caught at that word, toothless, because it meant something she had not felt in months. A crack in the wall. Cersei's jaw worked. Her pride warred with her fear. "We can trade," she said at last, voice brittle. "But we trade on our terms." Tyrion gave a humorless smile. "We don't have that many terms left," he said. Then he looked at Sansa, and his voice softened just a fraction. "You," he said, "you'll be needed." Sansa's hands tightened. "Needed for what?" Tyrion's eyes held hers, steady and strange. "To go home," he said. The small council chamber had a way of making men feel important even when they were helpless. The table was polished, the chairs carved, the windows tall enough to remind you that you sat above the city's filth. Yet the air inside was cramped with tension, heavy with the kind of silence that came before an argument turned into blood. Tyrion stood at the head of the table as if he belonged there. In truth, he belonged nowhere in this castle. Too sharp for comfort, too aware of everyone's weaknesses. His father's absence made the room feel unbalanced, like a cart missing a wheel. Joffrey paced like a caged dog. He could not sit. Sitting would have meant thinking, and thinking meant facing the fact that his power had a limit shaped like a wolf boy holding an old lion in chains. "I want heads," Joffrey said, voice loud enough to satisfy himself. "Stark heads, River Lord heads. I want them nailed up along the walls so the city can see what happens to traitors." "You can want anything you like," Tyrion said. "Wanting is free. Acting is expensive." Joffrey whirled. "Who are you two?" Tyrion stepped forward. "Your hand," he said, and the words were almost comical in their audacity. He watched Cersei's face twitch at the claim and did not care. "And as your hand, I advise you to stop behaving like a child who thinks shouting is strength." Cersei's voice came sharp. "Tyrion, you cannot speak to him." "I can," Tyrion said. "And someone must, since you apparently prefer to whisper lies into his ear and call it mothering." Cersei's eyes flashed, and for a heartbeat the room felt like it might ignite. Sandor Clegane stood near the throne, helmet under his arm, watching without expression. He looked bored, but Tyrion had seen men like Sandor. Men who could go from bored to slaughter in the time it took to draw breath. Varys's soft smile hovered like a mask. Littlefinger's eyes gleamed with delight. Pycelle clutched his beard as if it could protect him. "We negotiate," Tyrion said, turning back to the table, forcing the council to follow his lead by sheer will. "We send a messenger to Riverrun with offers. We prepare a prisoner exchange." Joffrey slammed his fist down. "I won't give them the girl." Tyrion's gaze went icy. "You will," he said, "because she is not yours." She is a hostage. And the point of a hostage is to be traded, not broken for sport. Joffrey's face twisted. She's a traitor. She's a child, Tyrion snapped. And if you harm her, Robb Stark does not just kill father. He kills Jaime too. And then what? Then we are a house with no head and no sword arm, and a city full of people who will begin to ask whether lions are worth following. Cersei's jaw clenched. We have gold, she said, as if gold could mend any wound. Gold flees when it smells blood, Tyrion replied. He looked at Varys. You'll know what the city whispers. Varys lifted his hands delicately. The small folk love tales, he said. A lion in chains is exhilarating. They will sing it, and they will sing it louder if our response is cruel rather than clever. Joffrey glared. They should fear me. They should, Tyrion agreed. But fear is not the same as hatred. Hatred makes people reckless. Reckless people do things like open gates. Littlefinger chuckled softly. So serious, he murmured. I do miss your father. He made this all so straightforward. Tyrion's eyes flicked to him. If you miss him so much, Tyrion said, you can go visit him in Riverrun's dungeons. Littlefinger's smile did not fade, but something in his eyes sharpened. He enjoyed danger when it wasn't his. Cersei leaned forward. What do we offer? She demanded. If we give them Sansa, they'll ask for more. They'll always ask for more. Tyrion spread his hands. We offer Sansa, he said. We offer coin. We offer the return of some captured riverlords. We offer withdrawal from certain holdings. We offer promises. And they offer father, Cersei said, voice tight. And Jaime, Tyrion added. His fingers tapped the table once, a small, controlled movement. We must assume Robb Stark is not an idiot, he said. He will not trade father for a bag of gold and a pretty apology. He wants independence. Joffrey's lips curled. He can want it. He can, Tyrion said, and we can refuse it. But refusing comes with consequences. We can stall, but stalling comes with risk. We can attempt rescue, but rescue comes with blood. Cersei's eyes narrowed. Rescue, she said, tasting it. Tyrion saw the thought forming in her. Gregor Clegane riding hard with a host, smashing through riverlords, burning Riverrun to ash, dragging Tywin out by force. It was a Lannister answer. Simple, brutal, satisfying. It's not so easy, Tyrion said quietly. They caught him in the woods. They're expecting force. Cersei's voice went colder. So we send you, she said. Tyrion barked a laugh. Me? He said. To negotiate or to be captured as well? To negotiate, Cersei said, eyes bright with calculation. You're clever. You always boast you're clever. Prove it. Tyrion leaned forward, voice low. If I go, he said, I go with full authority. No undermining, no secret orders. No Joffrey screaming for blood the moment I leave the room. Joffrey's face flushed. I'm king, and a king who wants his grandfather alive, Tyrion replied. Silence stretched. Sandor's gaze shifted to Joffrey. There was something like faint amusement in it, as if he enjoyed seeing the boy king checked. At last, Cersei's shoulders stiffened in reluctant concession. Fine, she said. Go. Negotiate. Bring my father home. Tyrion nodded once. Then we begin, he said, and turned toward Varys. Find me a messenger who can reach Riverrun without being cut to pieces. Varys bowed slightly. I know several, he murmured, smile serene. Tyrion looked at the table, at the faces of men who pretended they were steering the realm. He felt, for the first time in a long time, the true edge of fear. His father was a prisoner, and the realm was a board with too many hands on it. Prepare the girl, Tyrion said quietly. Joffrey's eyes flashed. Don't touch her, he snarled, but his words had lost some of their bite. Tyrion did not respond. He only thought of Sansa Stark, fragile, trapped, and now, somehow, the hinge on which lions might live or die. The reply came sooner than Catelyn expected, which made her distrust it at once. The Raven arrived near midday, wings beating hard against the cold air as it landed on the perch in Riverrun's rookery. Its leg carried a sealed parchment marked with the crowned stag and lion, an emblem that felt obscene now that a lion sat chained beneath the castle. Robb gathered his lords again in the great hall. They came quickly, drawn by the pull of possible endings. The table was set with maps and candles, but the maps had begun to feel like an old language. Useful, yes, but unable to capture the true chaos moving through men's hearts. Robb broke the seal. Catelyn watched his fingers, watched the slight tremor in them he tried to hide. He read once, then again. His mouth tightened. "Well?" Great John demanded. Robb lifted his head. "It's from Tyrion Lannister," he said. A ripple went through the room. Tyrion's name carried less weight than Tywin's, but it carried danger of a different kind: cleverness, unpredictability. Robb read aloud, his voice steady. "They acknowledge Tywin is held. They acknowledge Jaime. They will consider an exchange. They demand proof Tywin is alive and unharmed. They offer Sansa Stark's release in exchange for Tywin Lannister's release and Jaime Lannister's continued captivity as assurance. They refuse to discuss northern independence. They refuse to surrender Gregor Clegane. They offer gold and titles. They offer a withdrawal from certain disputed holdings in the Riverlands, words slippery enough to mean nothing." Ricard Karstark's face turned dark with contempt. "They offer crumbs," he said. "They offer a trap," Brynden said. Catelyn's heart pounded. "They offer Sansa," she whispered, and the words tasted like grief and hope together. Robb's gaze flicked to her, pain in it. "They offer Sansa," he agreed. "But they want Tywin back." Great John slammed his fist down. "So we say no," he roared. "We keep the old lion. Let them choke on their pride." Edmure Tully, present now restless, leaned forward. "If we can get Sansa home," he said carefully, "shouldn't we take it? Isn't that the point?" "The point," Karstark snapped, "is justice." Catelyn's voice rose, sharp despite her effort to stay calm. "The point is my daughter alive," she said, and the room went still. Robb's jaw worked. "We can't trust them," Robb said. "If we release Tywin, what stops them from keeping Sansa anyway? What stops them from sending us her bones and laughing?" Roose Bolton's voice came soft, almost gentle. "Trust is a luxury," he said. "We must build an exchange that requires no trust." Brendan's eyes narrowed. "And how do you propose that?" Roose smiled faintly. "With hostages," he said, "and witnesses, and terms that bind even liars." Robb stared at the parchment, mind racing. "They want proof Tywin lives," he said. "We can give them that. A letter from Tywin in his own hand. A seal. Something only he can provide. And they'll send proof Sansa lives," Catelyn said, quickly, urgently. "A letter from her. Something from her person." Robb's eyes met hers. He nodded once. "Yes," he said. "We demand that." Grachan's voice was still thunder. "And independence?" he demanded. "Do we just forget the North?" Robb's voice went cold. "We don't forget," he said. "We hold it. We keep Tywin until they talk seriously. Sansa first." Karstark's lip curled. "You'll let him live for a girl," he said, and Catelyn felt the cruelty of it. The way grief turned love into a bargaining chip. Robb's gaze snapped to Karstark, sharp enough to cut. "I'll let him live for my sister," Robb said. "And if you can't stomach that, remember that it was a girl who birthed your sons. Remember that it was a girl who stitched your wounds when you came home from battle. We do not trade our blood for your pride." Karstark's face twitched. His eyes dropped for a heartbeat, then rose again with stubborn fury. Brynden tapped the map with a finger. "Where do we make the exchange?" he asked. "If we do." Robb's mind moved through roads and rivers. "Not at King's Landing," Robb said. "Not near their walls. The Ruby Ford," Edmure suggested. "The crossroads by the Trident." "Too exposed," Brynden said. Roose Bolton's pale eyes glinted. "The twins," he murmured. A hush. Walder Frey's bridge was a choke point. Safe in one way, dangerous in another. Walder Frey was not loyal. He was convenient. Robb's jaw tightened. "Not the twins," he said at last. "Not yet." Catelyn saw his mind working. Every choice carried a cost. If he chose the wrong place, he lost Sansa. If he chose the wrong terms, he lost Tywin's leverage. If he chose the wrong allies, he lost the war. "We send our answer," Robb said. "We demand proof of Sansa's life. We demand she be delivered to a neutral site with witnesses. We do not release Tywin until she is in our hands." "And if they refuse?" Greatjon asked, eager for blood. Robb's voice hardened. "Then we make them regret refusing," he said. "We make the Westerlands bleed. We make their gold run thin. We remind them that holding a lion means we can starve the pride out of all of them." Catelyn's chest tightened, because she heard in her son's voice the beginnings of a hardness she had prayed he would never need. And yet the realm did not care for prayers. Robb rolled the letter up slowly. "Send the raven," he ordered. And as the rookery's doors opened to pale sky, Catelyn felt the war tighten around them like a noose that might, for the first time, also choke the Lannisters. Tywin's handwriting was as controlled as his face. Robb stood in the cell with the torchlight licking at stone. The quill scratched softly across parchment, the sound strangely intimate in a place built for confinement. Tywin wrote with his hands chained loosely enough to allow the work, by Robb's design. The letter would serve as proof. It would also serve as a test. Catelyn waited outside the door, listening, heart tight. She did not like her son alone with Tywin Lannister, not because Tywin could stab him, chains prevented that, but because Tywin could do worse than stab. Tywin could speak. Robb watched the old lion's hand move, clean strokes, no hesitation. When Tywin finished, he dabbed the wax with the edge of his thumb, then looked up. "There," Tywin said, "a letter in my hand, for your dwarf to admire." Robb did not reach for it yet. "You call him your dwarf," Robb said. Tywin's mouth barely moved. "I call him what he is." Robb studied him. "And what am I?" Tywin's pale eyes held Robb's without flinching. "A boy who thinks a hostage is a kingdom," Tywin said. Robb's anger stirred, hot and sharp, but he forced it down. "A hostage is leverage," Robb said. "You taught the realm that." Tywin's gaze shifted, minutely. "Leverage," he repeated. "Yes, but you don't yet understand what it means to pull." Robb stepped closer. "Teach me," he said, and the bluntness of it surprised even him. For the first time, Tywin looked at Robb as if he were not merely an enemy child but something worth considering. "Very well," Tywin said quietly. "You have me, and you have my son, and yet you still stand here worried that my daughter will cheat you." Robb's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't she?" Tywin's eyes did not soften. "Cersei will do what she thinks keeps her children safe," he said. "She will do it badly." Robb's hand tightened on the table edge. "And Tyrion?" he asked. Tywin's gaze flicked to the torch. "Tyrion will do what keeps the house alive," he said. "He will do it cleverly." Catelyn heard the words like a warning. Robb leaned in. "So what's your counsel?" he demanded. Tywin's mouth curved faintly, a shadow of a smile. "My counsel is that you are surrounded by men who will smile at you while measuring your throat," he said. Robb's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" Tywin's gaze slid past Robb toward the cell bars, toward where Grey Wind's pale eyes glinted in shadow. "Your mother knows," Tywin said. "She has already begun to fear the men you need most." Robb's breath tightened. "Roose Bolton," Robb said, and hated that Tywin had struck true without even naming him. Tywin's eyes sharpened. "Bolton," he said, tasting it. "A cautious man with a house built on fear." And the phrase. His mouth tightened with contempt. "Rats in a river." Robb's voice went hard. "You think you can turn me against my own lords?" Tywin's gaze held steady. "I think your lords will turn on you without my help," he said calmly. "Because victory makes men hungry. They will want reward, land, power, a share of your crown. And when you cannot give enough, They will seek another path. Robb's hand trembled once, then steadied. You think I'm weak, he said. Tywin's eyes flicked over him. I think you are untested, he said. You have taken 2 lions and believe you have one. But now you must hold them. Holding is harder than taking. Robb swallowed, throat dry. If you were in my place, Robb said, what would you do? Tywin's gaze did not waver. I would trade Jaime for the girl, he said. Because Jaime is valuable, but not more valuable than me. Robb's eyes narrowed. You'd sacrifice your son. Tywin's voice was flat. I would spend him, he said, if spending him bought the house's survival. The cruelty of it chilled Robb more than any threat. He thought of his own brothers, Bran, Rickon. He thought of himself as a hostage once, a ward in someone's keep, and the idea of being spent like coin made him want to vomit. I'm not you, Robb said. Tywin's gaze sharpened. No, Tywin agreed. You are not. Robb reached for the letter at last, taking it carefully, as if it might bite. You will write another, Robb said. When Sansa's proof arrives. Tywin's mouth curved faintly again. Of course, he said. I will write whatever keeps me alive. Robb's eyes flashed. And you'll tell Tyrion to accept my terms. Tywin leaned back slightly, chain link scraping. I will tell him nothing, Tywin said. You can't command my tongue. Robb's voice went cold. I can command your breathing, he said. Tywin's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat the dungeon held only the 2 of them. Wolf Boy and Lion Lord. Each measuring the other, each seeing the shape of a future where the realm would not forgive either. Grey Wind's low breath filled the silence like a warning. Robb turned, stepping out of the cell. As the door closed, Tywin's voice carried softly through the bars, calm as a knife. You should pray your mother is right, Tywin said, and that I am the most dangerous man you've captured. Grief did not leave a man just because you gave him an enemy. Catelyn saw Rickard Karstark in the courtyard before Robb did. He stood rigid near the well, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the castle's stone as if willing it to crack. Around him, Karstark men lingered like wolves denied a kill, their faces hard, their hands never far from weapon hilts. Robb crossed the yard with purposeful strides, cloak snapping in the wind. He had just come from the dungeons, Tywin's letter tucked inside his cloak like a secret wound. He stopped when he saw Karstark, and something in his posture tightened, a king bracing for a challenge from within. My lord, Karstark said, but the words held no warmth, only duty stretched thin. Rickard, Robb replied, and there was a tired edge beneath his calm. You wanted to speak. Karstark's jaw clenched. I want justice, he said. Robb held his gaze. We all do. Karstark's voice rose, sharp with pain. My sons are dead, he said. Dead because of Lannisters. Dead because of the Kingslayer. And now you keep their father alive in your dungeon like some prize. Great John Umber stepped forward, bristling. Mind your tongue, he growled. Karstark did not look at Great John. His eyes stayed locked on Robb. You speak of hostages, Karstark said. You speak of leverage. My sons were not leverage. They were my blood. Robb's voice stayed controlled, but Catelyn saw the strain in his hands, the way his fingers flexed as if aching for a sword. And Sansa is my blood, Robb said. So is Arya. Karstark's mouth twisted. A girl, he spat. You trade the lion for a girl. Catelyn felt the words like a slap. She stepped forward, but Robb lifted a hand, stopping her. He faced Karstark alone. You think she's just a girl, Robb said softly. You think that makes her less worth saving. But if your sons had lived, would you have called them just boys? Would you have shrugged and said boys die? Karstark's throat worked. His eyes glistened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. Don't twist this, he hissed. You owe me. Robb's gaze narrowed. I owe you, he said, and I will pay you, in gold, in land, in honors, in whatever victory grants me. But I will not pay you with my sister. Karstark's hand slid to his sword hilt. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Men around them tensed, steel whispering as fingers brushed blades. Greatjon's voice thundered. "Touch him, and I'll tear your bloody heart out." Karstark's eyes flicked to Greatjon, then back to Robb. "You'll pay me," he repeated, "or I'll take payment." Catelyn felt the courtyard turn cold. This was how wars inside wars began, one man's grief becoming a spark. Robb stepped closer, voice low enough that only Karstark could hear, yet somehow carrying through the silence anyway. "If you raise steel against me," Robb said, "you are not taking payment. You are betraying the North." Karstark's lip curled. "The North is not you," he snarled. Robb's eyes went flinty. "The North chose me," he said, and there was steel in it now, the hard edge of a boy who had learned that kindness could get you killed. "And if you can't follow, then go." Karstark's hand tightened on his hilt. For a heartbeat, Catelyn thought he would draw. She saw the courtyard drenched in blood. Northmen killing Northmen while lions laughed from far away. Then Karstark's hand fell away from the sword, as if the weight of what he nearly did finally struck him. His shoulders sagged, just slightly, like a man whose rage could not hold him upright forever. "Bring me justice," he said, voice rough. "Bring me some piece of their pain." Robb's gaze softened a fraction, and the softness looked like exhaustion. "I will," Robb said, "but on my terms, not yours." Karstark stared at him a long moment, then turned away sharply, cloak snapping as he strode off. His men followed, their anger dragging behind them like a chain. Greatjon spat into the dust. "He's a problem," he muttered. "He's a father," Catelyn said softly, and her voice cracked. "Don't forget that." Robb's gaze remained fixed on Karstark's retreating back. "I won't," he said, "but I can't let grief rule me." Catelyn watched her son, and the ache in her chest deepened. The lions in chains were dangerous, but the wolves outside the cage, hungry and grieving, could be worse. Roose Bolton moved through Riverrun as if he belonged to its shadows. He did not drink loudly in the hall. He did not sing. He did not swagger with victory. He watched. A Frey messenger arrived near dusk, slipping through the gates with the nervous look of a man who knew every lord in the Riverlands could decide his fate on a whim. His boots were caked with mud, his cloak damp, his hands stained with ink. He asked for Lord Bolton. That alone would have been enough to raise Catelyn's suspicion if she had been told. But no one told her. Messages did not always travel upward. They traveled sideways where ambition lived. Roose received the man in a quiet corridor near the old storage rooms, away from the bustle. Torchlight flickered against pale stone, casting Roose's face in shifting half-darkness. The Frey messenger bowed too low, too often. "My lord," the messenger murmured, "from the twins." Roose took the note without hurry. He read it once, then again, the corners of his mouth barely moving as if even expression cost him something. Walder Frey wrote like a man who believed ink was a weapon. Sharp, demanding, selfish. The old lord wanted assurance. He wanted gratitude. He wanted, above all, to feel that the wolves remembered who owned the bridge that had let them cross into glory. Roose folded the note carefully. "Lord Walder frets," he said softly. The messenger licked his lips. "He fears the war will end and he will be forgotten," he admitted. Roose's pale eyes watched him. "He fears being small," Roose said. "All men do." The messenger shifted, uneasy. "My lord," he said. "The old lord asks, what is to come of this? With Lord Tywin taken, will King Robb, will Lord Stark end the war? Will he still need the phrase?" Roose finished, voice mild. "He needs everyone, until he doesn't." The messenger's eyes flicked up, startled by the bluntness. Roose stepped closer, just enough to make the man hold his breath. "Tell Lord Walder," Roose said, "that he should remember how quickly men stop needing bridges when they learn to build boats." The messenger swallowed. "That sounds like a threat." Roose's smile was faint, bloodless. "It's a truth," he said, "and truths are often mistaken for threats by those who live by bargains." The messenger hesitated, then said quietly, "Lord Walder also asks about rewards." Roos's eyes did not blink. "Rewards," he echoed. "He wants marriage. He wants lands. He wants a seat closer to power." The messenger nodded quickly, relieved to hear it spoken plainly. "Yes, my lord." Roose turned his gaze toward the distant sound of laughter from the hall. Men drinking, celebrating. "They all want reward," Roose said softly. "The Umbers want glory. Karstark wants blood. The Tullus want peace. The Starks want honor, even when honor doesn't feed men." The messenger stared as if unsure whether he was being lectured or threatened. Roose's voice lowered. "Tell Lord Walder this," he said. "Tell him that war makes kings, and kings make enemies, and enemies make opportunities." The messenger's face went pale. "My lord," Roose lifted a hand, silencing him. "Go," Roose said. "Carry only what you were given. And remember, the twins are strong because they stand between north and south. But when the realm breaks, the things between become the most dangerous places to stand." The messenger bowed and fled, boots scuffing stone. Roose remained alone in the corridor. He looked down at the folded Fry note, then tucked it away inside his sleeve as if it were nothing. Above him, Robb Stark held lions in chains and believed that was power. Roose Bolton understood power differently. Power was not the lion you captured. It was the wolf pack you kept from turning on itself. He walked away without sound, leaving only torchlight flickering against empty stone, and the sense, impossible to prove, that something quiet had just shifted in the foundations of their victory. The envoy arrived with the kind of caution that smelled of fear. Ser Cleos Fry, thin, nervous, trying too hard to look noble, rode through Riverrun's gates beneath a white flag that fluttered weakly in the wind. Behind him came a small Lannister escort, their banners furled, their faces tight. They were men used to being the hunters. Now they rode like men entering a trap. Robb received them in the Great Hall, not the yard. Catelyn understood why at once. The hall let Robb control the space. It let him sit above them if he wished. It reminded everyone, including the Fry, that Riverrun had walls. Cleos Fry bowed deeply, almost tripping over his own dignity. "My Lord Stark," he said, voice too loud. "I come as a messenger." Great John Umber cut in, voice rumbling. "Not a guest. Mind your manners." Cleo swallowed and nodded rapidly. "Yes, my lord." Robb's face was calm, but Catelyn could see the tightness in his eyes. This was not a battlefield. Here every word mattered. "You carry proof?" Robb asked. Cleos hesitated, then held out a small cloth-wrapped bundle with trembling hands. "From Lady Sansa," he said. Catelyn's heart seized. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, then forced herself to still. Her hands ached with the need to snatch the bundle, to press it to her chest as if it could summon her daughter whole. Robb reached out and took it carefully. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a strip of blue silk ribbon, frayed at the edges. Sansa's ribbon. Catelyn recognized it instantly. Something her daughter had worn in her hair the day they'd left Winterfell, bright as a summer sky. Under it lay a small folded scrap of parchment, sealed with wax that bore the crown's mark. Robb broke the seal. He read silently. His face did not change, but Catelyn saw the way his fingers tightened. "Read it," Catelyn whispered, unable to bear the silence. Robb lifted his eyes to hers. He hesitated, then read aloud. It was Sansa's hand, shakier than Catelyn remembered. She wrote that she lived, that she was not hurt, that she missed her family, that she prayed to return. The words were careful, too careful, words written under watch. But at the bottom, almost hidden, was a second line pressed lighter, as if she had barely dared to write it. "Joffrey is angry. The imp tries. Please hurry." Catelyn's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of Freys and lions. Robb folded the letter slowly. His gaze lifted to Cleos Fry, cold and steady. "So she lives," Robb said. Cleos nodded quickly. "She does," he said. And she can be returned if, Great John echoed, disdain thick. Cleos licked his lips. If Lord Tywin is released, he said, voice wavering. And the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, remains our captive, Robb said. His voice was flat. That was in your letter. Cleos nodded. As assurance, he said. My Lord Tywin's safety is. His safety is my choice, Robb interrupted. The room went very still. Cleos swallowed. The Hand, Lord Tyrion, proposes an exchange at the crossroads near the Trident, he said. Under banners, with witnesses. Lady Sansa delivered to your party. Lord Tywin delivered to ours. And you keep Jaime, Catelyn said, hearing the trap in it. So you lose nothing. Cleos flinched at her tone. Lady Stark, he began. Catelyn stepped forward, eyes sharp. You tell your Hand, she said, voice trembling with fury she could no longer hide, that my daughter is not a coin to be tossed across a table. Cleos looked helplessly at Robb. My lord, Robb's gaze did not soften. We will not release Tywin until Sansa is in our hands, Robb said. Not near their walls. Not with their men surrounding us. We choose the place and we choose the numbers. If they want Tywin alive, they accept. Cleo's face went pale. My lord, King Joffrey. King Joffrey can learn what it means to be denied, Robb said coldly. And if he cannot, then you should remind him that I have his grandfather. Cleo's hands trembled. I will carry your words, he whispered. You will, Robb agreed. And you will carry this. Robb lifted the ribbon, held it up so the hall could see. You tell them that every breath Sansa takes is another breath Tywin takes, Robb said. And if she stops breathing, so does he. Cleos bowed shakily. Yes, my lord. As the envoy was escorted out, Catelyn felt her knees threaten to buckle with relief and terror combined. Sansa lived, but she lived inside a cage, and cages could become coffins quickly. Robb turned to his lords, voice low. Now we move, he said. Catelyn looked at her son and saw how the proof had changed him. Sansa's ribbon was a small thing, yet it weighed more than Tywin's chains. In King's Landing, Sansa's ribbon had been taken from her hair like a piece of her youth stolen for politics. She sat at a small table with a quill that felt too heavy in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she dipped it into ink. Across the room stood a handmaid, one of the Queen's women, watching as if Sansa might write secrets into the paper and set the whole castle on fire. Tyrion lingered by the door, arms folded, posture casual in a way that fooled no one. He did not look like a guard. He looked like an insult to guardhood. But he was there, and Sansa understood now that his presence mattered. Right? The handmaid said sharply. What the Queen commanded. Sansa lowered her eyes and began to form letters. My mother, my brother, I live, I am well. The words tasted like lies, even when they were true because they were forced. Her hand shook as she wrote. She could feel the handmaid's gaze on her fingers, could feel the Queen's shadow even when Cersei was not in the room. When she finished, she held out the letter. The handmaid reached for it, but Tyrion spoke. Let me see, Tyrion said. The handmaid hesitated. The Queen will survive my curiosity, Tyrion said, and there was something in his tone that made the woman obey. She handed the letter to him. Tyrion read it quickly. His eyes flicked to Sansa. Something passed between them, an understanding made of shared captivity, perhaps. Then he handed it back. Add, Tyrion said softly. One more line. Sansa's breath caught. She stared at him, fear tightening in her chest. Not openly, Tyrion murmured. His gaze flicked to the handmaid, then back. Hide it, he said. Light pressure, beneath the wax line. Write something only your brother will look for. Sansa's heart hammered. She did not know whether to trust him. Trust was dangerous, but so was helplessness. The handmaid snapped. No more lines. Tyrion smiled thinly. If you wish to tell the Queen you refused the hand, he said, I'm sure she'll reward you with a long walk off a short wall. The handmaid's face tightened. She said nothing. Sansa lowered her quill again. Her hand shook as she added the faint line, pressing so lightly she feared it would not show at all. Joffrey is angry. The imp tries. Please hurry. When she finished, she lifted the parchment. The handmaid snatched it, satisfied. Tyrion watched the woman leave with the letter, then turned back to Sansa. His expression shifted, less mocking, more tired. "You understand what you are now," he said quietly. Sansa swallowed. "A hostage," she whispered. Tyrion nodded. "A valuable one," he said. "More valuable than most men who carry swords." Sansa's throat tightened. Will they trade?" she asked, the question sudden, raw. Tyrion's gaze went distant for a heartbeat. "They must," he said, "or my father dies. And if my father dies, the realm becomes a feast for wolves and stags and krakens. And none of us will like what's on the table." Sansa clasped her hands to keep them from shaking. "Joffrey," she whispered. I know," Tyrion said. His voice hardened. "He's a monster wearing a boy's skin." Sansa flinched at the truth of it. Tyrion stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves could betray him. "Listen to me," he said. "Do not provoke him. Do not give him a reason to make this personal. His pride is all he has. Wound it and he will bleed you for it." Sansa's eyes burned. "He already..." Tyrion cut her off with a sharp look, warning. "Survive," he said simply. "Survive long enough to go home." Home. The word felt like a dream she was afraid to touch, in case it shattered. Tyrion exhaled slowly. "For what it's worth," he said, voice oddly gentle. "I don't enjoy this. I don't enjoy what my family does to you." Sansa stared at him. She had seen Tyrion mocked, belittled, treated like something shameful. She had also seen him laugh and drink and pretend nothing mattered. Now she saw something else. A man trapped in his own family's cruelty, trying clumsily to keep one girl from being crushed completely. "Why?" Sansa whispered. "Why help me?" Tyrion's smile was small and sad. "Because," he said, "if I can't save my own house from itself, I can at least stop it from devouring you entirely." A knock sounded at the door. Tyrion straightened at once, mask slipping back into place. "Time," he murmured. Sansa's heart clenched as he moved to the door, leaving her alone again with silk walls and invisible knives. But the faint line she had written, "hidden, dangerous," felt like the smallest act of rebellion. And in a castle where she had learned to live by pretending, that small rebellion tasted like hope. With Sansa's ribbon in his hand, Robb could not afford to wait politely for the Lannisters to decide whether they valued their own blood. He gathered his commanders and began to plan pain. Brynden Tully spread a second map across the table, this one showing the Westerlands, the hills and gold veins that fed House Lannister's pride. Great Jon Umber leaned over it, grinning like a man presented with a fresh barrel of ale. The Blackfish's finger traced roads with the precision of a hunter tracking prey. "We hit their supply lines," Brynden said. "Their mines, their grain stores. We burn nothing we can't carry, but we take enough to make their banners hungry." "Hungry lions bite," Great Jon rumbled happily. "They bite," Robb agreed. "But they can't bite if they're choking." Grey Wind stood with his paws near the table, head lowered as if he understood the lines and symbols. Robb could feel the beast's presence like a silent promise. Swift, loyal, lethal. Catelyn watched, heart tight. "If you strike the Westerlands," she said carefully, "you give them reason to refuse. They'll say you're proving you can't be trusted." Robb's eyes lifted to hers. "They already refuse," he said. "They already lie. If we sit and wait, they decide the pace. And the pace will be slow enough for Joffrey to do something cruel." Catelyn's throat tightened. She could not argue with that. Edmure hovered near the edge, anxious. "And the exchange?" he asked. "If we raid, won't they?" "They'll hurry," Robb said. His voice was hard now, shaped by necessity. "If their gold bleeds, they hurry." Roose Bolton stood apart, hands folded, watching with pale calm. "A bold move," he murmured. "Bold moves invite bold responses." Robb's gaze flicked to him, measuring. "That's the point," Robb said. "Let them respond. Let them show their hand." Brynden tapped the map near the coast. "Lannisport," he said. "Not the city itself, too fortified, but the roads around it. The keeps feeding it." "And what of the Riverlands?" Catelyn asked. "If you ride west, who holds here?" Robb's mouth tightened. "Bolton holds the trident," he said, and Catelyn felt the weight in that sentence. Trust forced by need. Roose inclined his head slightly. "Gladly," he said. Catelyn wanted to protest. She wanted to insist on someone else. But who? Great John was needed for the raid. Karstark was unstable. The Riverlords were tied to their own lands. Robb had too many fires and not enough hands. Robb's voice softened slightly as he turned to Catelyn. "Mother," he said, "I need another thing from you." Catelyn's heart clenched. "What?" "A pact," Robb said, "with one of the Baratheon brothers. Renly or Stannis. If we can secure an alliance, we keep the Lannisters from isolating us. We keep—" His voice caught, then steadied. "We keep Sansa's return from being their only reason to speak to us." Catelyn understood at once, and dread slid into her bones. "You want me to ride south," she said. Robb nodded. "You're the only one they'll treat with," he said. "Not because you're a woman, because you're my mother, and because you speak with a voice that sounds like the Riverlands' honor and the North's grief together." Catelyn swallowed. She remembered riding south once before, with Ned, believing she was going to a court where courtesy mattered. Now she would ride into a field of kings and try to keep her son from being crushed between them. "I'll go," she said, because she could not refuse. "But promise me you won't lose yourself." Robb's eyes held hers. "I won't," he said, and Catelyn heard how much he wanted it to be true. That night, riders prepared. Saddles were tightened. Spears were checked. Horses were fed and calmed. The courtyard smelled of leather and sweat and iron. Robb walked among his men, speaking quietly, laying a hand on a shoulder here, offering a nod there. They looked at him with fierce loyalty, but Catelyn saw something else too. Hunger. They wanted blood. They wanted reward. They wanted the war to mean something. Robb stopped at the edge of the dungeons and looked down the stairs. He did not go in, but he listened to the faint sounds below. Chains shifting, water dripping, the quiet patience of a lion who waited. Above, the castle slept uneasily. Beyond, the realm held its breath. And in the morning, wolves would ride west to tear gold from the hills, while Catelyn Stark would ride south to bargain with kings. Because the war was no longer just about victory. It was about timing. Catelyn left Riverrun with the taste of unsaid prayers in her mouth. Dawn was thin and cold. The sky washed pale as bone. The river ran beneath the bridge, dark and steady, carrying away everything it touched without asking permission. The castle behind her loomed with damp stone and banners that hung still in the morning air. She rode with a small escort, Tully guards who knew the roads, men who had seen too many burned villages to believe in clean journeys. Their faces were grim, their hands never far from sword hilts. On the bridge, Robb stood watching. Gray wind sat beside him like a shadow. Robb's cloak snapped faintly in the wind, and for a moment Catelyn saw him not as a king or a war leader, but as her son standing in the cold, trying not to look like he needed her. She halted her horse at the bridge's edge and looked back. Robb stepped closer, voice low. "Be careful," he said. Catelyn nodded. "Always," she replied. Then, after a breath, she added the truth beneath the word. "I'm afraid." Robb's mouth tightened. "So am I," he admitted, and the honesty made her chest ache. She reached out and touched his hand. Just a brush of fingers, brief and fierce. "Remember Sansa," she whispered. "Remember that she's alive. Don't let the war make you forget her face." Robb's eyes flickered with pain. "I won't," he said. Catelyn turned her horse and began to ride. As the bridge fell behind her, Riverrun became a shape of stone and banner in the distance. and the world opened into road and uncertainty. The Riverlands stretched around her. Fields scarred by war, trees stripped by cold, villages that stood half-empty as if afraid to be noticed. Every mile carried the war's evidence. A farmhouse burned to black ribs, a cart overturned in a ditch, a flock of crows rising from a place where something dead lay hidden in grass. Catelyn rode with her cloak tight, mind churning. Renly Baratheon with his bright court and his summer smile, gathering power as if power were a tourney prize. Stannis Baratheon with his grim justice and his red priestess, sharpening his claim like a sword. Either could crush Robb if they chose, once the lions were weakened. She thought of Tywin in chains, and the thought made her uneasy. Tywin was a prisoner, yes, but prisoners could still poison. Tywin's words had already lodged in Robb's mind. Hold is harder than take. Men will measure your throat. Catelyn could not unhear it. Behind her, in Riverrun, Robb began his own movements. Riders would soon thunder west, carrying wolf banners into the hills of Lannister gold. Roose Bolton would hold the trident with pale calm. Karstark would brood with grief sharp enough to cut loyalty. Frey pride would fester at the twins. And beneath the castle, Tywin Lannister would sit and listen, waiting for the moment when a crack became a break. Catelyn rode south into that widening web, feeling the threads tighten around her family with every hoofbeat. She did not know whether she rode toward salvation or disaster. She only knew she had to try because mothers did not get to surrender. The wind rose, cold and restless, and carried with it the distant cries of ravens. Black wings beating over a realm that was learning, too late, what it meant when wolves began to hunt like kings. The road west did not feel like a road at all. It felt like a wound in the earth, narrow, jagged, unforgiving, where stone rose in sharp shoulders and wind squeezed through like a blade seeking a gap in armor. Robb Stark rode at the front with his cloak pulled tight, the direwolf's head clasped cold against his throat, and the cold itself seemed to sharpen him. The Riverlands had been wet and green and suffering. The west was hard and pale and hungry. Behind him, the north followed. Not as a great host with banners spread wide, but as a lean body of riders chosen for speed and surprise. Men whose horses could endure, whose hands could hold a spear steady after days without proper sleep. Many were too young, their cheeks still soft in places where beard should have grown. Many were old enough to have known a dozen winters and to trust none of them. All of them had that particular look men gained when war stopped being adventure and became work. Great John Umber rode close, broad as an ox, his beard flecked with frost, grin flashing whenever the pass narrowed as if the earth itself were trying to choke them. Westerlands, he rumbled, voice carrying even over the wind. Never thought I'd smell Lannister gold on the air. There's no gold on the air, Brynden Tully muttered, hunched in his saddle with the stiff posture of a man who had never liked long rides but had outlasted younger men through spite. He held the map in a gloved hand, the parchment flapping and snapping. Only cold, and if you keep talking, you'll scare every scout within a mile. Great John laughed, then lowered his voice. Barely. Let 'em hear, he said. Let 'em know the wolves are coming. Robb said nothing at first. He watched gray wind ahead, the dire wolf moving over stone as if the rock belonged to him. The beast's paws found holds where hooves might slip, his body a smooth line of muscle and purpose. Every so often gray wind paused, ears pricked, nose lifting. When he moved again, Robb moved too, trusting that silent judgment more than any map. They had left Riverrun with Sansa's ribbon wrapped in cloth inside Robb's saddlebag, tucked near his spare gloves as if it were something fragile that could break. It felt like carrying a piece of Winterfell into enemy land. The thought of his sister's handwriting, thin, pressed light beneath wax, had lodged inside him like a thorn. Please hurry. As if haste could outrun cruelty. Tywin Lannister sat in chains beneath Riverrun's stone, and the old lion's absence had thrown the realm off balance. Robb could feel it like the shift of weight when a cart's load slid unexpectedly. Power moved. Men looked around and saw possibilities where once there had only been fear. That was why Robb rode west. If the Lannisters wanted to stall, Robb would make stalling bleed. If they wanted to bargain with half-promises and slippery words, Robb would give them something solid to fear. Empty storehouses, burned wagons, lords in captured chains. Gold was the lifeblood of their house. Robb intended to wound the vain. At the rear, a few riders murmured prayers to gods they barely knew how to name. Others spoke of home in careful tones, as if speaking the word Winterfell too loudly might summon disaster. Robb did not speak of home. He held it in his mouth like a coal. Hot, constant, dangerous to swallow. The pass tightened. The wind picked up, carving at cheeks and lips. Horses snorted, breath steaming. Robb lifted a hand, and the column slowed to a careful crawl. Brynden leaned in, eyes narrowed against the sting of cold. "The Golden Tooth is ahead," he said. "Not the castle itself, too strong, but the lands around it watch this road. Lannister eyes, if they've any sense left." "If they had sense," Great John murmured, "their lord wouldn't be rotting in a dungeon." Robb's mouth tightened. "Don't underestimate them," he said. His voice came out low, steady, and the men near him fell quiet. "They're wounded. Wounded beasts are the ones that bite hardest." Grey Wind stopped abruptly on a shelf of stone and lowered his head, sniffing. His hackles rose in a slow ripple. Robb felt it before he heard anything. An absence, a tightening in the air. He raised his fist. Riders halted, the column freezing in place. The wind hissed through rock as if pleased to be the only sound. Then, faintly, came the clink of metal not made by their own harness. A horse's snort from somewhere ahead, answered too quickly to be natural. "Scouts," Brynden whispered. Robb drew his sword just enough for the steel to whisper free, then slid it back. "No," he breathed. "Knives first." Men shifted, hands going to daggers, bows loosened without being lifted. Greatjon's grin widened, feral and quiet. Robb slid from his saddle without a sound, boots finding stone. He moved forward with a handful of his best, Daisy Mormont among them with her axe at her hip, silent as the snow. Grey Wind padded beside Robb, head low. They crept along the rock shelf until the pass opened into a narrow pocket where scrub clung to stone. There, sheltered behind a boulder, 2 Lannister scouts crouched, cloaks drawn tight, their horses tethered poorly. They were cold and bored and did not expect death to arrive without trumpets. Grey Wind moved first, a blur of dark fur. One scout barely had time to turn before jaws closed on his shoulder and dragged him down with a wet grunt. The other reached for his sword, eyes wide, and Robb was on him, dagger punching into the gap beneath his ribs. The man's breath hissed out. His hands clawed at Robb's sleeve once, then fell limp. Robb wiped the dagger on the scout's cloak, face expressionless. He looked down at the dead men and felt nothing triumphant, only the grim knowledge that this was the cost of speed. He motioned to the tethered horses. "Bring them," he whispered. No signs left behind. Great John joined them, looming over the bodies like a shadow. "That's how it starts," he murmured, pleased.
Kieli. Tledevs.
Then the screaming. Robb looked west, past the stone teeth of the pass, toward hills that held gold and lions and lies. "Then let it start," he said, and mounted again. The column moved forward, slipping through the world's narrowest throat, and every hoofbeat carried them deeper into land that had never expected wolves. By the second day in the west, the air smelled different. Not sweeter, not cleaner, just different, like the breath of an enemy you had not yet seen. The hills rolled with stubborn grace, green-brown beneath a dusting of frost, and scattered pines stood like sentries that had grown tired of watching and decided to become trees instead. The roads were better here than in the Riverlands, stone laid in places maintained by coin, and that alone told Robb everything he needed to know. The Lannisters paid for their comfort. Robb intended to make comfort expensive. They moved in a pattern Brynden Tully approved of, fast, then still, hidden then sudden. They rode at dawn and dusk, rested in hollows where smoke could not be seen. They took what they needed from small keeps and lonely farms and left payment when they could, because Robb refused to become the kind of army that ate the innocent just because it was hungry. Some men grumbled. Great John did not. Great John had learned quickly that Robb's discipline was part of his strength, not weakness. Wolves who fed on their own pack did not survive winter. Late in the afternoon, Grey Wind gave warning again. Not a sound, just a shift. He stopped on a ridge, ears forward, and the riders behind him fell silent as if the beast's stillness had spread through them. Robb slid from his saddle and crawled to the ridge's edge. Below, on a winding road between low stone walls, a line of riders passed. 6 men in red cloaks, lion helms dull under cloud. Scouts again, but heavier armed. The lead man carried a horn at his side. He rode like someone who expected to be attacked and was prepared to announce it. "They're learning," Brynden whispered beside Robb. Robb watched the line, measuring. If the scouts reached the next holdfast and sounded warning, the West would begin to gather. Robb needed a deeper cut before the wound could clot. He lifted a hand and made 2 short motions. Greatjon's men shifted, bows rising carefully, arrows notched but not drawn. Robb's own riders spread through the hollow like a shadow breaking apart. Grey Wind slid away to the right without being told, taking the slope with silent ease. When the scouts entered the narrowest bend, Robb dropped his hand. Arrows fell from above like sudden rain. The first man went down with a grunt, the shaft buried in his neck. His horse stumbled and carried him a few paces before collapsing. The second rider screamed as an arrow struck his thigh, sliding off bone and pinning him to the saddle. He clawed at it, losing his grip on reins, and his mount bolted sideways into the stone wall. The horn bearer jerked his arm up, eyes wide, trying to bring it to his lips. Grey Wind hit him from the slope in a blur. The direwolf's weight slammed the man from his saddle. Teeth flashed. The horn fell into the mud with a dull thud and rolled to rest against a stone. The remaining scouts tried to scatter, but the bend and walls turned their horses into trapped beasts. Greatjon's riders surged down, axes and spears cutting off escape. It was quick. Not clean, because war never was, but quick enough that no one rode away to warn a lord behind a warm wall. When it was done, Robb stood among fallen men and sniffed the air. The blood smelled hot against cold stone. A horse whickered softly, panicked, eyes rolling. Brynden dismounted and picked up the fallen horn. He turned it in his hands like a dead snake. "They'd have blown this," he said. "Now they won't." Robb nodded. He turned to one of his outriders. "Strip them," he ordered. "Take their cloaks, their seals, anything with names." "Names?" Great John said, amused. "You collecting them like trophies?" "Like messages," Robb corrected. "Every sigil we take is proof. Every proof is another inch of pressure on King's Landing." Daisy Mormont wiped her axe and glanced toward the road's curve. "Someone sent these," she said quietly. "Stafford," Brynden murmured. "Or one of the lesser lords. With Tywin missing, every man in the West is trying to decide who leads." Robb stared out over the hills. Somewhere beyond them was a larger camp. Green boys called up in haste, knights eager to prove their loyalty, wagons full of grain and iron and coin. A force built not for battle but for reassurance. If Robb struck that force, the West would panic. Panic made men hurry. Hurry made mistakes. "Find me where they gather," Robb said. Greatjon's grin returned, wolfish. He said, "will sniff him out." Grey Wind lifted his head, ears pricked as if he too had caught some distant scent on the wind. He looked west and growled softly, not in anger, but in anticipation. Robb placed a gloved hand briefly on the direwolf's neck, feeling the warmth beneath wet fur. "Soon," he murmured, to the wolf or to himself. They dragged the bodies off the road and covered the blood with dirt and frost. They led away the best horses and left the rest loose, because a frightened horse could carry rumor as fast as any raven. Then they moved again, slipping into the hills like a shadow stretched thin. Behind them, the road lay quiet. Ahead, the Westerlands waited, still rich, still proud, still unaware of how close wolves were to its throat. They found the camp at dusk, because camps always betrayed themselves when the light began to fail. Smoke rose in thin trails from cookfires. Horses stamped and snorted. Men shouted orders that did not quite fit together, because hastily raised hosts were stitched from fear, not training. Brynden guided Robb to a rise overlooking a shallow valley. Below, tents clustered in uneven rows, a mess of canvas and poles. A line of wagons sat near the center, guarded by a ring of men with spears that looked too long for their hands. Banners flapped, red and gold, lion sigils heavy with pride. Here and there, bright cloaks marked knights who believed their presence alone could hold a line. Robb lay flat on cold grass and watched. He saw boys stirring pots. He saw a knight slapping a stable hand for not tightening a girth properly. He saw, near the largest tent, a man in a fine cloak speaking sharply to subordinates. Older, heavy-set, face red from cold and temper. "Stafford Lannister," Brynden murmured. "Tywin's cousin. Not the sharpest blade in the rack." Grachan's breath came like a growl. "Sharp enough to bleed." Robb's eyes stayed on the wagons. "Sharp enough to carry what we need," he said. He lifted his hand, and the riders behind him fell into the positions they had practiced since leaving Riverrun. Grachan's men to the left, brutal, loud, meant to break. Dacey and the Mormonts with the right, steady, meant to hold. Brynden and the outriders to circle and cut off wagons. Robb himself would go straight for the center because the center held leadership and leadership was the spine. Break the spine and the body collapsed. Gray wind slid down the slope first, silent as night, disappearing into the dark grass. Robb watched him vanish and felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Fear and thrill, braided together so tightly he could not untangle them. Then Robb drew his sword and lifted it. The charge came out of the dusk like a nightmare. Hoofs thundered. Men shouted. The first camp sentry had time to widen his eyes and open his mouth before a spear punched through him, and he fell without making the warning he meant to make. A dog barked once, frantic, then vanished under trampling hooves. Tents erupted with men scrambling half-dressed, grabbing weapons, colliding in panic. Someone screamed, "Wolves!" as if the word itself explained everything. Robb rode into the heart of it, cloak snapping, sword raised. He cut down a man who stumbled into his horse's path, then another who lifted a spear too slowly. He did not watch them fall. In battle, you could not afford to mourn each body you made. Great John smashed into the camp's attempted shield wall like a boulder. His axe rose and fell, splitting wood and bone. His men howled behind him, and the sound was enough to break the courage of boys who had never faced real killers. Ser Stafford Lannister appeared near the largest tent, sword drawn, face pale with shock. He shouted orders, trying to force his levies into line. "Hold!" he bellowed. "Hold, you fools, hold!" A boy with a spear looked at Stafford, looked at the wolves charging, and dropped his weapon to run. Another followed, then another. Fear moved faster than any command. Stafford's gaze landed on Robb, and for a heartbeat the two of them locked eyes across chaos. Stafford's expression twisted, rage and disbelief, as if the world had betrayed him by allowing a northern boy to ride into the Westerlands like a conqueror. Stafford rushed forward, swinging his sword in a wild arc. Robb met it, steel ringing. Stafford's grip was strong but clumsy, fueled by panic rather than skill. Robb stepped inside the swing and slammed his pommel into Stafford's jaw. The man staggered back, teeth cracking, eyes watering. Before Stafford could recover, gray wind erupted from the shadows and collided with him. Stafford screamed as jaws closed on his forearm. His sword fell. He tried to wrench free, but the direwolf's strength dragged him down into mud. "Enough!" Robb shouted, voice raw. He dismounted, boots sinking, and shoved his blade towards Stafford's throat. Not touching, but close enough to make the point clear. Stafford froze, breathing hard, blood running from his mouth where the pommel had struck. Gray Wind's teeth still held his arm, the direwolf's eyes pale and unblinking. I yield, Stafford gasped, and the words came out broken. Robb gestured sharply. Men surged in, yanking Stafford upright, prying Grey Wind's jaws free with careful hands. Stafford's arm bled freely. He swayed, shock setting in, but he lived. Around them, the camp collapsed. Bryndon's outriders reached the wagons and drove off defenders with swift, efficient violence. They cut harnesses, turned teams, seized the reins. Grachan's men pursued fleeing levies until Robb's shouted command brought them back. Killing boys who ran did nothing but make enemies who would never bargain. Take what we can carry, Robb ordered. Burn what we can't. Men hauled sacks of grain, crates of iron, barrels of salt. They found coin too. Gold and silver stamped with lions, heavy in hands that had never held so much wealth. One rider emerged from a tent with a bundle of letters and seals clutched like treasure. "Robb!" he shouted, waving them. "Orders, muster lists, names." Robb took them, fingers stiff with cold. He flipped through quickly, eyes scanning ink. Names of bannermen, routes of wagons, mentions of Lannisport, a note from King's Landing, half-coded, urgent. "Keep the roads open, protect the gold, the city's needs are great." "So they are starving," Brynden said when Robb showed him the line. "Good," Great John rumbled, and the words sounded like prayer. Robb looked down at Stafford Lannister, who was bound now, face pale, pride broken into something like fear. "You'll write," Robb said. Stafford's eyes widened. "Write what?" "You'll write to King's Landing," Robb said. "You'll tell them the West is bleeding. You'll tell them Wolves are in their hills. You'll tell them that every day they delay with my sister is another day their gold caravans die." Stafford swallowed. "They'll kill me if They'll kill you anyway." Robb cut in, voice flat. "Either by my blade now or by their disappointment later. Choose which death you prefer." Stafford's breathing turned ragged. His gaze darted to Grey Wind, whose muzzle was streaked with blood. Stafford's courage crumpled. "I'll write," Stafford whispered. Robb rose and looked over the camp. Tents burned now, fire licking canvas, sending sparks into cold air. Men shouted as wagons were turned. Horses screamed, then quieted. The smell of smoke mixed with the smell of blood. For a heartbeat, Robb felt the war's shape again, how it could swallow everything. He forced himself to focus on purpose. This raid was not vengeance. It was leverage. It was a knife pressed to a lion's belly. Somewhere in King's Landing, Cersei would read Stafford's words. Tyrion would calculate. Joffrey would rage. Somewhere in Riverrun, Tywin would listen to distant echoes and know his land was paying for his captivity. Robb mounted again, sword still wet. "Move," he ordered. They did not linger. Wolves did not feast in the open when hunters could gather. They vanished into the hills with captured wagons and bound lords, leaving behind a camp of ash and panic, and the first real proof the Westerlands were not untouchable. Tywin learned about the raid the way he learned about everything now, through other men's footsteps. The dungeon corridor carried sound in strange ways. A guard's boots could announce mood before words did. A hurried pace meant fear. A slow, measured one meant confidence or pretense. That night, when the steps came down the stairs too fast and stopped too abruptly outside Tywin's cell, Tywin knew before the key turned that something in the world had shifted again. The cell door did not open. The guard remained outside, breathing hard, and muttered to another. Tywin caught only fragments: West, burning, wagons, Stafford. Tywin sat very still on his bench, hands chained, posture straight. In the torchlight, the lines of his face looked carved sharper. He did not react outwardly, because outward reaction was for men who needed others to see their feelings. Tywin had never needed that. Robb Stark appeared in the corridor not long after, cloak damp, eyes shadowed with exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. Grey Wind padded at his side, silent, and lay down on the stone between them with the calm of a beast that had recently fed. Robb held a parchment. The seal on it was broken already. "Your West is bleeding," Robb said, voice low. Tywin's eyes lifted to him. "So you've chosen to raid?" Tywin replied. He spoke as if discussing weather. Not unexpected. Robb's mouth tightened. Stafford Lannister is my prisoner, he said. A flicker, so small it might have been imagined, passed over Tywin's eyes. Not fear, not grief, calculation. Stafford was a cousin, useful but not beloved. Stafford was also proof that Tywin's absence had left his house scrambling. And, Tywin said, Robb held up the parchment. He wrote to King's Landing under my blade, Robb said. He told them what I told him to tell them. Tywin's gaze sharpened slightly. You force men to write, he observed. You forced villages to burn, Robb shot back. Tywin did not bother denying it. War, he said. Robb stepped closer to the bars, the torchlight catching on his cheekbones, making him look older, harder. They sent me a reply, Robb said. Tyrion's reply. He wants proof you're alive. He wants exchange terms. He refuses independence. Tywin leaned back slightly, chains scraping stone. Of course he refuses, Tywin said. No one gives away kingdoms because a boy asks politely. Robb's voice went cold. Then I'll take it. Tywin's gaze held him. Taking is easier than holding, Tywin said, and the repetition of his earlier lesson carried the weight of inevitability. How long will your lords follow you when winter bites? How long will the Freys keep their bridge loyal when they smell a better bargain? Robb's jaw tightened. You keep saying that, he said, as if you're casting a spell. Tywin's mouth barely moved. It's not a spell, he said. It's history. Robb stared at him, and for a moment the corridor felt too narrow to hold both of their wills. Grey Wind's eyes opened slightly, watching. You'll write again, Robb said at last. To Tyrion, in your hand. You'll acknowledge the terms I set. You'll tell him Sansa returns first, under witness, and only then do we discuss your release. Tywin's gaze did not soften. I'll write, he said, because writing costs nothing. And you'll mean it, Robb said. Tywin's eyes glinted. Meaning is for songs, he said. I'll do what keeps me alive. Robb's fingers tightened around the parchment. Your life, Robb said, depends on my sister. Tywin looked at the direwolf lying between them. And her life, Tywin said calmly, depends on my family's restraint. The words hung like a knife. Robb exhaled slowly. Tyrion is coming north, he said. That did draw Tywin's full attention. Coming? Tywin echoed, voice still controlled, but the interest sharpened. In person, Robb nodded. He wants to oversee the exchange, Robb said. He's bringing Sansa to the Riverlands. Tywin's gaze drifted, not to the bars, not to Robb, but to the empty air as if he were already moving pieces on an invisible board. Tyrion coming meant many things. It meant Cersei was desperate. It meant the court's balance had shifted. It meant opportunity, not for escape perhaps, but for influence. Your sister will travel with lions, Tywin said quietly. And wolves will take her back, Robb replied. Tywin's eyes returned to Robb. You think this ends when you have her, he said. Robb's voice was rough. I think it begins again, he admitted. For a heartbeat, Tywin looked almost approving, in his cold way. Good, he said. At least you're not blind. Robb's gaze flicked toward the corridor's shadows, toward the guards who listened too closely. You won't speak to anyone else, Robb said. No whispers. No bargains through bars. Tywin's mouth curved faintly. You overestimate how much men listen to prisoners, he said. Robb's eyes hardened. I've seen men listen to corpses, he said. Don't test me. Tywin held his gaze. You're learning, Tywin said again, and this time it sounded less like taunt and more like a verdict. Robb turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, he said. Tywin lifted an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. Robb's voice dropped. If Sansa comes back harmed, he said, you won't die in your sleep. You won't die quickly. You'll die knowing your house's gold bought nothing but your own suffering. Tywin's eyes did not flinch. Threats? He said softly. are more convincing when you don't repeat them. Robb's mouth tightened, and he left without another word. Tywin remained seated, chains heavy on his wrists. Grey Wind's eyes watched him for a long moment before the direwolf rose and followed Robb away. Alone again with dripping water and torch smoke, Tywin Lannister stared at the broken seal on the parchment in his hands and began, silently, to plan around a son who was coming north, because even in chains, the lion's mind still hunted. Harrenhal made men quiet. It did not matter how bold a soldier was, how loud his laughter had been around a fire the night before. When he walked beneath Harrenhal's broken towers, he lowered his voice without being told. The castle was too large, too scarred, too heavy with the memory of fires that had melted stone like wax. The walls felt like the inside of a skull, vast, hollow, and haunted by things that did not care about living men. Roose Bolton moved through it with the calm of a man who had never expected comfort from walls. He wore a plain cloak despite the cold, his face pale and unreadable. His men had taken the castle with more ease than anyone would have believed. Lannister garrisons, scattered and uncertain without Tywin's iron hand, had not held their nerve when northern banners appeared. Some fled, some died, some bent the knee quickly, hoping a new master might be less cruel than the last. Roose did not promise mercy. He promised order, that to most men sounded like mercy enough. A raven arrived near noon, flapping hard against the castle's chill air, and landed on a cracked parapet as if relieved to have found stone that did not threaten to collapse. Its leg carried a scroll sealed with red wax. Not the crown seal, not the dire wolf. A smaller mark, private, unofficial. Roose broke it with a careful thumb and read without expression. A fryman stood nearby, hands clasped, watching Roose's face as if trying to read weather in winter sky. The phrase had come quickly when Roose sent word. Too quickly. Rats ran toward changes in power with admirable speed. "Well?" the fry asked softly, unable to hold back. Roose folded the scroll and tucked it into his sleeve. "News," he said. "From Riverrun?" The fry pressed. Roose's eyes slid to him. "From a road," Roose corrected. "From a man who rides that road." The fray's throat bobbed. "Is it true?" he asked. "Is the dwarf coming north with the Stark girl?" Roose's mouth did not move much, but the smallest hint of amusement touched his eyes. "It appears so," he said. The fry licked his lips. "Then the war ends," he said quickly, hopeful. "If they trade the girl for Lord Tywin." Roose's gaze turned cold enough to freeze that hope. "Wars don't end," he said softly. "They change names." The fry hesitated, then said what he had truly come to say. "Lord Walder wishes to know what King Robb intends," he murmured. "He has interests. He fears being overlooked when peace is carved." Roose stopped walking. The silence of Harrenhal pressed in. Somewhere above, a loose shutter banged in the wind like a slow drum. "Lord Walder fears many things," Roose said, "but he should fear irrelevance most of all." The fry swallowed. "He offers, as always, loyalty," he said, the words sounding like coins sliding across a table. "If rewarded." Roose's eyes remained steady. "Reward," he echoed. "A simple hunger." The fry glanced around the courtyard, uneasy under the castle's looming shadow. "And you, my lord?" he asked carefully. "What do you hunger for?" Roose looked up at Harrenhal's tallest tower, its top broken like a snapped bone. "Peace," Roose said softly. The fry looked relieved, foolishly so. "Yes," he said quickly. "Peace. We all." Roose's gaze slid back down, pinning him. "Peace," Roose repeated, "is what men call the moment they decide who must bleed so they can sleep." The fray's mouth opened, then closed. He did not understand, and perhaps that was mercy. Roose resumed walking. Northern soldiers watched him pass, their eyes uneasy. They had followed him because Robb commanded it. They held Harrenhal because it was strategically valuable. Roads, rivers, a fortress that could intimidate even while cursed. Yet the men whispered at night about screams in stone, about shadows that moved where torches did not reach. Roose did not fear shadows. In his chambers, once a Lord Solar, now a cold room with cracked hearth, Roose sat and opened the scroll again, reading slowly. The message was brief, written in a careful hand he recognized even without signature. It did not command. It suggested. It pointed out weaknesses with the precision of a knife. The young wolves need to be loved. The fractures among his lords, the hunger of the Freys, the grief of Karstark, the ambition of those who wore loyalty like a cloak that could be thrown off when it stopped warming them. Roose's expression remained calm as he read, but something inside him tightened. Not fear, not awe, recognition. Even in chains, the lion still reached. He folded the scroll again and held it for a moment, thumb pressing the paper's edge. Then he set it beside a second letter. One from Walder Frey demanding what was owed. Roose's fingers hovered between them like a man choosing which blade to pick up first. Outside, Harrenhal's vast courtyard lay under gray sky, and men moved like small insects beneath ruined stone. Somewhere far away, Robb Stark rode through hills of gold, believing his speed could keep the world from turning on him. Roose Bolton sat in silence and listened to the wind move through cracked towers, and he smiled faintly at the thought that the most dangerous thing in the realm might not be the captive lion or the riding wolf, but the space between them. Renly's camp looked like a festival pretending to be war. Catelyn rode into it with mud on her horse's legs and cold in her bones, and the sight made her throat tighten with disbelief. Tents spread across rolling fields like bright mushrooms after rain, silk and canvas gleaming with fresh dye. Banners snapped, green and gold, the rose of Tyrell beside the crowned stag of Baratheon. Men laughed, men drank. Armor was polished until it caught the pale sun like a mirror. It smelled of roasted meat and wine and horses well-fed. In the Riverlands, camps had smelled of damp wool and fear. Here, the air smelled of confidence. She was escorted to Renly's pavilion, a towering thing with rugs so thick her boots sank into them slightly. Lanterns hung like captured stars. A table was laid as if expecting guests rather than diplomats desperate to stop a realm from tearing apart. Renly Baratheon rose when she entered, wearing his crown like it was made for him. He was handsome in the easy way some men were, the kind of handsome that made people forgive his flaws before they noticed them. His smile was bright, almost boyish, and for a heartbeat Catelyn understood why men followed him. He made them feel as if the world could be light again. "Lady Stark," Renly said warmly, "or should I say Lady Tully, since you honor me in your father's hall's name as well?" Catelyn bowed stiffly. "Your Grace." Renly's smile flickered, amused. "So formal," he said. "I do hope my brother Stannis hasn't infected the realm with his love of grim faces." Brienne of Tarth stood behind him like a wall, tall, armored, eyes earnest and fierce. Her hand rested near her sword hilt not as threat but as devotion, as if the blade were an extension of her belief. Loras Tyrell lingered nearby, beautiful and sharp as a thorn, watching Catelyn with a gaze that did not miss the mud, the tiredness, the grief in her posture. "You've come with news," Renly said, settling back into his chair as if this were a game he expected to enjoy. "News, I'm told, that has the lions howling." Catelyn's jaw tightened. "Tywin Lannister is my son's prisoner," she said plainly. Renly laughed, delighted. "Ah," he said, "so it's true. I wondered if Varys was spinning tales. Tywin in chains. What a delightful image." Catelyn did not smile. "It's dangerous," she said. "It changes everything." "It changes a great deal," Renly agreed, eyes bright. "It makes the Lannisters weaker. It makes my path to King's Landing smoother. It makes Joffrey," he shrugged, "a problem with less support." Catelyn stepped closer, voice tightening. "It makes my daughter's life hang on a bargain," she said. "And that is why I'm here." Renly tilted his head. "Your daughter," he said, thoughtful. "Sansa, the little bird in the Red Keep." Catelyn's hands clenched. "They will trade her," she said. "They must. But my son needs more than one exchange. He needs assurance. He needs alliance." Renly's smile softened into something almost gentle. "Ah," he said, "you want me." The bluntness made heat rise in Catelyn's cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I want peace," she said, "and I want my son not to be crushed between kings who don't care what the North has suffered." Renly leaned forward, elbows on his table, studying her like a man appraising a horse. "Your son calls himself king in the North," he said. Catelyn's voice was steady. "He was chosen," she said. "The North will not bend to the Iron Throne again." Renly's expression turned curious rather than offended. "And yet you come to me," he said, "a man who also claims a throne." "A throne you will take from Joffrey," Catelyn said. "A throne my son does not want." Renly's smile returned. "Do you truly believe that?" he asked softly. "Power has a way of teaching men what they want." Brienne shifted slightly behind him, as if the implication pricked her. Loras's eyes narrowed, amused. Catelyn's voice went colder. "My son wants his people safe," she said. "He wants his sisters home. He wants justice for his father." Renly's gaze softened again, and for a heartbeat he looked almost sincere. "Justice," he murmured. A beautiful word, heavy, difficult. Catelyn stepped closer, the rug swallowing the sound of her boots. "If you truly want to be king," she said, "then help end this. Join with my son. Declare that the North may choose its own king, and my son will not interfere with your claim. The Lannisters will be isolated. The war will end faster." Renly's eyes flicked to Loras, then back. "You ask me to give away part of the realm," he said. "I ask you to recognize reality," Catelyn replied. "The North has already left. You can pretend otherwise and fight us later, or you can accept it and focus on the lions." Renly leaned back, fingers drumming lightly on the table. "And what do I gain?" he asked, the question wrapped in charm but sharp beneath. Catelyn felt anger rise, at the selfishness, at the ease of his luxury while her son bled. She forced it down. "You gain speed," she said. "You gain fewer enemies. You gain a realm that might actually accept you because you ended a war instead of extending it." Renly's mouth curved. "You speak like a queen," he said lightly. Catelyn's voice did not soften. "I speak like a mother," she said. Renly's smile faded into something more serious. He stared at her a long moment, and Catelyn wondered if she had finally reached him, if the bright boy king could see beyond his own ease. Then Renly sighed, almost regretful. "I cannot," he said. The words struck like cold water. "You cannot," Catelyn repeated. Renly shook his head slowly. "If I give the North independence," he said, "every other corner of the realm will demand the same. Dorne will ask. The Iron Islands will howl. The Vale will remember it can hide behind mountains. I will inherit a kingdom already broken into pieces." Catelyn's hands clenched. "It is already broken," she snapped, then swallowed, forcing herself to breathe. "Then what will you do?" Renly smiled again, that easy, deadly smile. "I will take King's Landing," he said. "I will remove the Lannisters." And then he spread his hands. "Your son can come to me as a loyal subject." Catelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. "He will not," she said, voice trembling with fury. Renly's eyes held hers. "Then we will have another war," he said lightly, as if discussing the weather. Brienne's face tightened, discomfort flashing. Loras's mouth curved with faint amusement. Catelyn stared at Renly Baratheon and realized, with a cold clarity, that he was not cruel. He was worse. He was careless. He believed he could win everything because he had always been admired. "You're no better than the lions," Catelyn said quietly. Renly's smile faltered. "Oh," he said, mild surprise. "That's unkind." Catelyn's voice went hard. "Unkindness is a luxury," she said. "You sit in silk while children die in burned villages. You speak of kingdoms like they are toys." Renly's eyes narrowed slightly. "Careful," he said, charm turning to warning. Catelyn held his gaze without flinching. "I will be," she said, "because I have to be." She turned to leave, cloak dripping onto his rugs, and felt Brienne's gaze follow her with something like respect and sorrow. As she stepped out into the bright chaos of Renly's camp, Catelyn's heart hammered with a new fear. If Renly would not recognize the North, then the war would not end with lions. It would only shift to stags. Dragonstone tasted of salt and bitterness. The castle rose from black rock like a clenched fist, its towers shaped like dragons frozen mid-roar. The sea threw spray against its walls with relentless contempt. Men did not come here seeking comfort. They came because Stannis Baratheon demanded it, and Stannis Baratheon demanded many things. Stannis stood on the stone terrace with the wind clawing at his cloak. His face was hard, carved in angles and resentment. He watched the gray sea as if it were an enemy army he could somehow bring to heel through stubbornness alone. A raven had arrived, feathers slick with rain, carrying news that should have pleased him. Tywin Lannister captured. Jaime Lannister captured. King's Landing weakened. The lions cut. Davos Seaworthy stood a careful distance away, hands tucked inside his sleeves to keep them from shaking. He had sailed through storms and smuggled through blockades and survived by respecting what could not be controlled. Stannis did not respect what could not be controlled. Stannis tried to force it into shape. Melisandre of Ashai stood beside the king, red robes snapping, hair like a dark flame. Her eyes looked wrong in the gray light, too bright, too knowing. Davos hated her eyes. He hated the way she spoke, as if the world were already written and men were just ink. "They bleed," Melisandre murmured, voice soft and certain. "The lions bleed. The fire does not lie." Stannis' mouth tightened. "They should bleed," he said. "They stole my brother's throne. They murdered his children. They weakened," Melisandre corrected, as if the moral meaning mattered less than the tactical. "The city is ripe." Davos stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "King's Landing is still a hard nut. The walls are high. The river can be chained. Wildfire." Stannis' gaze snapped to him, cold as the sea. "I know the city," he said. "I held it for my brother when he played at being king. I starved there. I watched men eat rats and leather. I know its weakness." Melisandre turned her face toward Davos, smiling faintly. "A city weakens when its defenders lose faith," she said. "And faith is a flame that can be snuffed." Davos's stomach tightened. He had heard her speak of flames before. He had seen men burn. He had smelled flesh. He did not want the realm saved by fire that ate children as easily as enemies. Stannis stared out over the sea. "Renly gathers his rainbow knights," he said, voice dripping contempt. "He plays at war as he plays at everything." "He will not yield," Davos said quietly. Stannis' jaw clenched. "He will," Stannis said. "He must. The law is plain." Melisandre's voice slid in like silk. "The law is ink," she whispered. "The fire is truth." Stannis' gaze flicked to her. "You promised me victory," he said. Melisandre's smile did not waver. "I promised you the throne that is yours," she said. "But the path is lit by sacrifice." Davos felt cold creep up his spine. "Your Grace," he said, forcing the words out. "There must be another way." Stannis' gaze did not soften. "There is no other way," he said. "Not when my brother pretends he can steal what is mine with smiles and roses." Davos swallowed. "If Tywin is captured," he ventured, "perhaps the North and Riverlands will." "Will what?" Stannis snapped. "Bend the knee? They'll call themselves kings and expect me to applaud? No. When I sit the throne, there will be one king." Melisandre's red sleeves fluttered. "The wolf boy thinks himself strong," she said softly. "He holds a lion in chains and believes that makes him safe. But his pack is fractured. A mother rides south, and fathers in grief sharpen knives." Stannis' eyes narrowed. "You see much," he said. "I see what the flames show," Melisandre replied, "and they show a stag crowned in fire." Davos's mouth went dry. He looked at Stannis and saw the king's hunger, cold, relentless, righteous in its own mind. He looked at Melisandre and saw something worse. Certainty. "The city," Melisandre whispered. "Now, before the lions regain their spine, before the dwarf's cleverness buys time." Stannis's jaw worked. "We sail," he said at last, words like stones. "But first, Renly." Davos's heart sank. He knew what that meant. He had heard whispers, seen shadows in torchlight that did not belong. He had watched Melisandre's calm as men spoke of murder and called it justice. Stannis stepped away from the parapet, cloak snapping. "Send word," he ordered. "To the lords, to the captains. We move." Davos watched him go, then looked at Melisandre. Her smile was small, satisfied. "The night is coming," she murmured. Davos's hands clenched. "It always comes," he said bitterly. Melisandre's eyes gleamed. "And it always burns," she replied. Below them, the sea-hammered dragonstones rock with tireless rage. Somewhere far away, in a damp dungeon under Riverrun, Tywin Lannister listened to drips and planned around a sun who rode north. Somewhere in bright fields, Renly Baratheon laughed, unaware of the shadow moving toward him. And on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon chose fire. The day they told Sansa she would leave, she did not believe them. Belief had become a dangerous habit in King's Landing. Every time she believed something good, the city punished her for it. Hope was a candle that drew hands eager to snuff it. So when the handmaid arrived with a gray cloak and orders to dress for travel, Sansa's first thought was not relief. It was trap. She dressed anyway, because refusing orders here was like refusing weather. She braided her hair tight so hands could not easily grab it. She wrapped her fingers around the edge of her cloak until her knuckles whitened, telling herself over and over that she would not tremble, not in front of them. The stable yard was crowded with movement. Grooms leading horses, guards checking saddles, a covered wheelhouse waiting with its door open like a mouth. Lion banners hung over the archway. Gold cloaks watched with bored eyes that could turn cruel without warning. Tyrion stood near her, cloaked against the chill, face set in an expression that tried to be casual and failed. Bronn lingered behind him, checking his sword belt as if this were just another day's work. Bronn's eyes flicked over the yard with the alertness of a man who expected a knife from any direction. Cersei arrived like a storm in silk, her gaze sharp enough to cut. Joffrey followed, restless, a boy trying to look like a king by making his anger louder. "So," Joffrey said, voice too bright, "you're leaving." Sansa forced herself to look at him. "Your Grace," she said softly. Joffrey stepped close and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug in hard. Sansa bit back a gasp. Pain flared. "You'll tell your brother?" Joffrey whispered, leaning in so close she could smell wine on his breath. "That he's a fool. You'll tell him he can't win. And you'll tell him I'll hang him from his own walls." Sansa's mouth went dry. She nodded because nodding was safer than speaking. Joffrey's grip tightened. "Say it," he hissed. "Say you'll tell him." Tyrion's voice cut in, low and sharp. "Release her," he said. Joffrey turned, eyes flashing. "She's mine," he snapped. Tyrion's smile was thin, dangerous. "She's a hostage," he said. "And you're trading her because your grandfather sits in chains. If you want him alive, you let go." Cersei's eyes narrowed at Tyrion, hatred raw. "Don't speak to him like he's a child?" Tyrion interrupted. "He is." Joffrey's face reddened. His grip on Sansa loosened slightly, not from mercy but because his attention had been stolen. "When I'm older," he snarled. "When you're older," Tyrion said. "You'll still be stupid, just with more wrinkles." Bronn coughed a laugh, quickly stifled when Cersei's glare swung toward him. Sansa stood very still, arm aching. She kept her eyes on the ground, because looking at Cersei felt like inviting a slap. Cersei stepped closer, voice smooth and cold. "Don't think this means you win, girl," she murmured. "You go because it benefits us. Remember that." Sansa's throat tightened. "Yes, your Grace," she whispered. Cersei leaned in, breath warm with wine and bitterness. "If you speak of what happened here," she said softly, "if you breathe a word of what my son did, I will find your brother's little wolf pup and I will strangle it in front of him." Sansa's stomach lurched. She nodded again because that was what she had learned. Nod, smile, survive. Tyrion touched her elbow gently, guiding her toward the wheelhouse. His hand was light, careful, as if he knew she might flinch from kindness too. "Get in," he murmured. Sansa climbed inside, cloak dragging. The interior smelled of leather and old straw. She sat stiffly on the bench, hands clenched in her lap. Her heart hammered so hard she feared the guards outside could hear it. The door remained open. She could hear Joffrey still arguing, his voice rising. "I don't want her to go," he shouted. "She should stay. She should marry me. She should be traded," Tyrion's voice replied, flat. "And you should learn that not everything you want is yours." Sansa closed her eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw Winterfell's godswood, pale faces in red leaves. She saw her father's smile. She saw her mother's hands smoothing her hair. When she opened her eyes again, the door was closing. The wheelhouse rocked slightly as horses were hitched. Outside, Bronn's voice carried. A joke, a low laugh, then Tyrion's quieter words. "Stay near me," Tyrion said, and Sansa did not know if he spoke to Bronn or to her. The wheelhouse lurched forward. The Red Keep's walls began to slide past the small window like a dream shifting. Sansa held her breath until the archway opened and the city's stink rushed in. She was leaving the castle. She was leaving King's Landing. It did not feel like freedom yet. It felt like moving from one cage to another, carried by lions, guarded by men who could change their minds. But as the wheelhouse rolled through the gates and the city fell behind, Sansa felt something inside her stir. Small, fragile, real. The road, the possibility, and the terrifying knowledge that the next time she saw her brother, the world might be different enough that she would not recognize it. The King's Road did not care who rode it. It stretched north and south like a scar, cut into the realm long before any of them had been born, and it carried armies as easily as it carried merchants. Now it carried lions with their pride bruised and their urgency hidden behind banners. Tyrion rode at the front because he refused to be a passenger in his own family's desperation. He sat his horse with a grim steadiness, cloak pulled tight, eyes sharp. Bronn rode beside him as if he were out for a pleasant hunt, humming under his breath, relaxed in the way only dangerous men could be. Podrick Payne followed close, earnest and nervous, trying to look brave and failing in a way that made Tyrion's chest tighten with something almost protective. Behind them, the covered wheelhouse rolled, heavy on the road. Sansa was inside. Tyrion could feel her presence like weight, like responsibility, like leverage made human. They traveled with fewer men than Cersei would have liked and more than Tyrion could comfortably trust. Too many men meant too many ears. Too few meant a wolf pack could descend from trees and end everything in a heartbeat. Tyrion chose a middle path and hated that it was still a gamble. The farther they went from King's Landing, the more the land's wounds showed. Burnt farmsteads stood like black teeth in fields. Fences lay broken, trampled. Here and there, crows lifted in dark clouds from something dead in a ditch. The Riverlands looked like a place that had been bitten and kept bleeding. Sansa did not speak much when the wheelhouse stopped for rest. When Tyrion approached, she stepped down carefully, cloak wrapped tight, eyes lowered. She moved like someone who expected the ground to shift under her. "You should eat," Tyrion told her once, offering a piece of bread. Sansa hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed his, and she flinched at the contact as if kindness could sting. Bronn watched from a few paces away, amused. "She looks like she'd rather bite you than the bread," he said. Tyrion shot him a look. "Then don't offer your hand," Tyrion replied. Sansa ate in small bites, eyes scanning the trees like a trapped bird. Tyrion understood that look. He had worn it himself in his father's shadow. "You're safe for now," Tyrion said quietly, keeping his voice low so only she could hear. Sansa's lips pressed together. For now, she echoed, and the words carried all the knowledge she had learned. Now could end any time. Tyrion exhaled slowly. Your brother is not stupid, he said. He'll want this exchange clean. Sansa's gaze flicked up at the mention of Robb, pain and longing flashing. He captured Lord Tywin, she whispered, as if the words were still impossible. Tyrion nodded. He did, he said. And your brother has discovered the truth my father spent his life teaching the realm. A single man can change everything if he's the right man. Sansa's hands tightened around her bread. Then why did you let me go? She asked, the question sudden, raw. Tyrion stared at her for a heartbeat. Because my father is in chains, he said bluntly. And because my nephew is a vicious idiot who would happily break you just to feel powerful. And because if I let him, my father would die and the realm would burn. Sansa's throat tightened. So I'm coin, she whispered. Tyrion's mouth tightened. You're a person, he said, and his voice carried something like anger. At her family, at the world. But yes, he added softly, you're also coin. We're all coin to someone. Sansa stared at him, eyes shining but refusing to spill. I don't want to be coin, she whispered. Tyrion looked away toward the tree line. No one does, he said. They rode again. The wheelhouse creaked. Hooves thudded. The world rolled past in cold gray stretches. Every shadow in the trees looked like a spear. Every bend in the road felt like a decision. At night, Tyrion lay in a tent and listened to the men outside. Guards muttering, horses shifting. He could not sleep. His mind kept returning to Riverrun's dungeons, imagining his father sitting upright in chains, eyes cold, judging Tyrion's choices. He had chosen to come himself because he did not trust Cersei not to sabotage the exchange out of spite. He did not trust Joffrey not to do something cruel at the last moment. He did not trust Littlefinger not to sell the entire situation to the highest bidder. And, truth he swallowed bitterly, he did not trust himself to let his father die if it came to it. On the third day, they passed a crossroads where a burnt signpost leaned crooked, its letters charred. Bronn rode up beside Tyrion, voice low. Someone's been watching, Bronn murmured, nodding toward distant hills. Tyrion's stomach tightened. Stark scouts. Maybe, Bronn said. Maybe bandits. Maybe wolves with banners. Tyrion glanced back toward the wheelhouse. The thought of Sansa being taken before the exchange both relieved and terrified him. If the wolves took her, Tywin lived. But Tyrion would have failed, and failure in House Lannister had teeth. Double the watch, Tyrion ordered. Bronn's grin flashed. You pay extra? He asked. Tyrion snorted. You'll steal it anyway, he said. Bronn laughed softly and rode off to bark orders. That evening, Sansa spoke once more, in the quiet moment when the camp settled and the stars were faint behind cloud. Will my mother be there? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Tyrion's chest tightened. He thought of Catelyn Stark riding south, bargaining with stags. I don't know, he admitted. War moves people like wind moves leaves. Sansa swallowed. I'm afraid, she whispered. Tyrion looked at her, really looked, at the thinness of her face, at the careful way she held herself, at the bruised shadow on her arm where Joffrey's fingers had gripped too hard. Something in him hardened. Good, he said softly, and when Sansa flinched he added, Fear keeps you alive. Don't let it make you fully. Sansa nodded slowly, eyes down. Above them, a raven flew north, beating black wings against gray sky. Somewhere ahead, Riverrun waited. Somewhere ahead, a wolf king weighed a lion's life against a sister's breath. Somewhere ahead, the road ended in a meeting where one wrong word could turn exchange into slaughter. Tyrion stared into the dark and wished, briefly and bitterly, that his father had never ridden into that wet forest. The raven found Robb at night, because ravens always found men at their weakest hour. The camp was tucked into a hollow between two low hills, hidden from distant roads. Fires burned small and low, their light shielded by stone. Captured wagons stood in a line like trophies that felt too heavy to celebrate. Bound Lannister knights sat near the edge under guard, heads lowered, pride leaking away into cold dirt. Robb sat on a rock with his cloak around his shoulders, staring at the flames without seeing them. The raid had been a success, too successful, some part of him whispered, because success made men bold and boldness made them careless. He could feel his riders' hunger now, the way they spoke of gold as if it were proof the gods favored them. Then the raven arrived, flapping hard and frantic, and the camp shifted into tense motion at once. A guard brought the message, wax seal broken by cold fingers. Robb took it and read by firelight, eyes moving fast. Tywin Lannister rides north. Sansa Stark is with him. Exchange proposed at a chosen ford on the Red Fork, under banners with limited escort. Riverrun requests your return with all speed. Tywin demands proof you will not kill him upon release. Karstark men restless. Robb read it again, slower this time, feeling the words sink into him like stones. Sansa is with him. The thought hit like a fist. Sansa on the road, exposed to ambush, exposed to men who might change their minds, exposed to the cruel whims of weather and worse. The ribbon in his saddlebag felt suddenly heavier, as if it were pulling him backward toward Riverrun and forward toward the ford at the same time. Great John loomed over his shoulder, beard catching firelight. Well, he rumbled. More lions to gut? Robb lifted his gaze. Tyrion is coming, he said. With Sansa. For a heartbeat, the camp seemed to exhale. Men exchanged glances. Some looked relieved. Others looked disappointed, as if the prospect of peace threatened to steal their chance at more blood and plunder. Brynden stepped closer, face tight. Then we ride, he said immediately. We ride now. The exchange must be on our terms. And you need to be there. Robb nodded once, but his mind was already racing through consequences. If he rode back now, he left the Westerlands raid unfinished. He left gold still in hills, caravans still moving, pressure still building. But if he stayed, he risked Sansa. He risked Tyrion arriving and finding no Wolf King to meet him, only lords hungry for vengeance and bargaining. He thought of Karstark's eyes, of Fry Hunger, of Roose Bolton in Harrenhal's shadow. He thought of Tywin's calm voice in the dungeon, saying holding was harder than taking. He felt the truth of it in this moment. The battlefield was no longer just fields and forests. It was men's hearts. It was timing. It was the fragile space between decision and disaster. We can leave riders, Great John said, as if reading his hesitation. Let em keep biting while we ride back. Brynden shook his head sharply. Not without you, he said. This raid works because they fear your head. Without you, it becomes banditry. And banditry makes enemies that don't bargain. Robb's jaw tightened. He looked at the bound Lannister knights, their faces pale in firelight. He looked at the wagons loaded with grain and iron. He looked at Grey Wind, sitting perfectly still, eyes pale and patient. Sansa, Robb said softly, and the name tasted like blood. He stood. The movement drew every eye. Even the prisoners lifted their heads slightly, sensing something shifting. We ride, Robb said, voice carrying. We ride hard. We leave nothing we can't carry. We burn what we must. We take our prisoners and our wagons and we go back to the Riverlands. A murmur rippled. Some relief, some resentment. Robb raised his hand, silencing it. This is not over, he said, voice hard. Not the raid. Not the war. Not the independence they refuse to name. But my sister is on the road. And that road is more important than gold. Great John grinned, pleased again. He rumbled. Home first. Then more killing. Brynden's expression did not soften. Move fast, he said. And keep your men tight. Lannister scouts will be hunting for you now. Robb nodded. He turned toward Grey Wind and knelt briefly, pressing his forehead to the direwolf's wet fur. He felt the beast's steady breath, felt the warmth beneath cold air, and drew strength from it like a man drawing heat from a fire. When he rose, his face had changed. The boy who had ridden into the west hungry for leverage was still there, but now he was sharpened by something deeper. Fear for a sister he had not seen since Winterfell. Fear made men desperate. Robb could not afford desperation. He could only afford speed. The camp erupted into movement.
Men kicked dirt over fires.
Horses were brought up, saddles tightened, straps checked in frantic hands. Prisoners were hauled to their feet and bound more securely. Wagons creaked as teams were hitched. Robb mounted, sword at his hip, cloak snapping. He looked once toward the dark west, where smoke still rose in thin lines from the camp they had burned, and felt the pull of unfinished violence. Then he turned east. "Ride," he ordered, and his voice was not a plea. It was command. The column surged forward into the night, hoofs thundering over frozen ground. Behind them, the Westerlands held its breath, wounded and furious. Ahead, the Riverlands waited with a ford that would decide whether a girl came home or a lion died. Above them, clouds drifted like torn cloth across the stars, and the wind carried the distant cry of a raven. Black wings beating over a realm that no longer knew what peace looked like, only what it might cost.